This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Thursday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. I just want to correct myself. I said that MicroStrategy was getting hammered. It was getting hammered, and now it's actually up by 1.3%. Citron Research announced it was betting against the company. The stock fell, but then it's now recovered a little bit. Just wanted to prove that to myself there. Okay, let's get to other topics. One that has kind of emerged over the last few days is Unilever. So its ice cream plan to spin it off is actually changing, and they are sort of retrenching a little bit. So we wanted to get more details on that with Duncan Fox, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Consumer Staples Analyst. Remind us, Duncan, what Unilever was gonna do, and now what are they thinking about doing?
Well, about a year ago, I think, or at the start of this year, they said they would sell the business to another party. So private equity were rumoured to be interested. It looks like that has sort of gone by the wayside a little bit, and now they're considering an IPO. To be fair, it's a report out of the Financial Times, and they are saying that they may well consider a sale to another player in the market, but it never quite sat properly with me that it was a private equity sort of business, to be honest. But so I think not an enormous amount has changed, but I think an IPO in 25 may be looking a little bit more likely now.
What's wrong? I love the ice cream business. Why is Unilever getting rid of the ice cream business?
It takes quite a lot of capital to make sure that it works properly. It's got a great...
Do you know how much stuff they have in those ice creams?
Do they?
I mean, the Ben and Jerry's thing, it's like we're going to pack everything in the candy section in this little pint. Sorry, go ahead, Duncan.
It's not just that. It's just they've got a massive frozen food sort of distribution network. That's quite costly. You've then got, obviously, cocoa that's gone slightly nuts in the last year or so as well in terms of the price. You've got to make sure you have all the right products. You've got to make sure innovation comes every summer. Really, from Easter onwards, that's when the ice cream season starts. You then got to pray the weather's good. And Lord knows what's going to happen there. So there's a lot of things that can change the metrics on how it delivers. So it can be very good one year and very poor the next. So it's a tough one to get consistent growth from, really. It is the best ice cream business out there. It's global leader, 20% market share, but nevertheless, you've still got those externalities that can kill results in any one year.
Also, Ben and Jerry's became very political. I mean, I know you said they had a lot of frozen food, but Ben and Jerry in particular became very vocal on some political positions. What role did that play into all of this?
It probably made selling it to private equity a little bit more difficult. Rather than anything they're saying politically, it's more that they object to things changing much, and that makes it very much more difficult for private equity to take any costs out and merge the business. They want to keep their sort of separate, how it was bought back in the 1990s. So, and it's very, very difficult to break something like that. So selling it as a whole business unit, as an IPO, actually makes it a lot easier to do that because it's obviously a great brand that's growing pretty well. So, breaking it off and trying to break its traditions might not be a very good thing to do either.
Duncan, give us a sense of the global ice cream business. How big is it? How fast is it growing? Is it a good business?
Well, it's I think it's about $89 billion is the last number that I've seen. So about 83 billion, 84 billion euros, something like that. And it seems to be growing sort of a low 3%, so sort of 2.5% to 3%, something of that order. I'll say the trouble is that's not linear. So you may well get one year that's growing 6-7 because it's a hot year, and then the next will be potentially down. So I think that sounds like a sensible number on a medium-term view to do about 3% a year, which is pretty much what you get for a food company, frankly. Looking at global GDP and population growth, that's what you get.
So is the path of least resistance for a company like this big, and I'm also kind of thinking about Nestle too, like just the really huge European consumer giants. Is it going to be about trimming fat? Is it going to be about slimming down and not be this massive conglomerate, but be more specialized?
It's interesting because Unilever said that some of the personnel they were potentially going to let go in the overall business have been put into the ice cream business now. We don't know a lot of the details on that at the moment, but as I say, you've got a very big distribution network, frozen food, which needs people to deliver to millions of small shop owners around the world. where you've got those basically Unilever freezers. So to drive that impulse business, this is where you make the margin. It's very difficult to take that out of there. So I think that's part of the reason why maybe private equity didn't see eye to eye on value. But actually, if you get that right, and you've got the product in place when people want to buy it, then you can make significant money. So I think it's just really about getting the innovation right, making sure the product is where it should be, and actually just achieving what a good business should do. Which, to be fair, I think on the whole, the Unilever ice cream business has done. I don't know what we can do about the weather, I'm afraid.
All right, Duncan, thanks so much for joining us. Ice cream business, who knew? Duncan Fox, consumer staples analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us via Zoom from somewhere over in southwest England. I'm calling it Dorset. Why be in London when you can be in Dorset, southwest England?
All right,
That's not bad.
take it. Why not?
The ice cream business, kind of a GDP kind of growth business. So I didn't know there was the year-to-year fluctuations based upon weather. I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't know that was a thing either.
Interesting. All right, so we're going to have more coming up. But that was a good couple hours here on Bloomberg Intelligence. We're taking a look at the earnings. Pretty much wrapped up for global Wall Street here. Now I think probably the focus goes back to kind of some news out of Washington, D.C., policy on economic policy and others, as well as some of the global economic news and what that means for the Federal Reserve. That seems to be where the focus will be over the coming weeks. That does it for Alex and me. We are going to drive this conversation forward with Balance of Power with Joe Matthew. That's coming up next after this global business update. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. Court developments for the father who bought a gun his teenage son is accused of using to carry out a Georgia school attack.
Attorneys for Colin Gray appeared before Judge Joseph Booth after their client waived his right to appear.
We waived his presence. We are prepared to sign for him a plea of not guilty.
And that plea was accepted by the court. The 54-year-old Gray faces 29 charges stemming from the September shooting that left 4 dead and several others wounded. Gray's 14-year-old son Colt pleaded not guilty at his arraignment last month. The teen is the alleged gunman in the Appalachia attack. Graham Carroll for CBS News, Atlanta.
The Illinois Supreme Court has thrown out the conviction of actor Jussie Smollett. He was found guilty of orchestrating a hate crime hoax after prosecutors initially dropped charges against him. New details have emerged from the 2017 California police investigation into Trump cabinet pick Pete Hegseth. CBS's Olivia Rinaldi.
This woman alleges he brought her to his room, he blocked her from leaving, took her cell phone, and then proceeded to have a sexual encounter with her that she said was not consensual. Police then spoke with several people, including the woman, but also a nurse at the hospital. And the nurse was actually the one who alerted them to this after she said the woman came to her days later, asked for a rape kit, said she believed she had been drugged as well.
Hegseth was not charged. The U.S. has condemned the International Criminal Court's decision to seek arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for alleged war crimes in Gaza. CBS's Elizabeth Palmer.
The court said there were reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant had intentionally deprived Gazan civilians of food, water, medicine, and electricity. The warrants are going to put both of them at risk of arrest if they travel to any of the 124 countries that are members of the court, but that does not include the U.S. or Israel.
Arrest warrants also issued for a top Hamas official. CBS's Jim Krasula has more on a death sentence that's set to be carried out here at home.
Carrie Dale Grayson is scheduled today to become the third person executed by nitrogen gas in Alabama. The 50-year-old man was one of 4 young men convicted of killing a 37-year-old woman who was hitchhiking through Alabama in 1994.
A significant report on existing home sales in October. Economist Lawrence Yoon of the National Association of Realtors.
Home sales increase not only month to month, but from 1 year ago. So this is a first annual gain in over 3 years.
And checking Wall Street right now, the Dow is up more than 300 points. Audience participation's being discouraged as a new film's vocal fans turn out.
Popular. AMC theaters will play a reminder before every Wicked showing that silence is golden. Screens will call for no talking, texting, singing, wailing, or flirting. A spokesperson says it's part of the chain's long-standing policy prohibiting disruptive behavior, something this early TikTok viewer can go along with.
Not only were people singing like at the top of their lungs, but what was almost worse is people whisper singing and their timing was off.
Universal will offer interactive sing-along screenings at Christmas time. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
Conceptual art doesn't get any more conceptual than a banana duct taped to a white wall. That work is sold for $6.2 million at auction. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Now it's Pete Hegseth's turn. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Donald Trump's pick for defense secretary makes the rounds today in the Senate. He's on Capitol Hill right now with new questions about his police record and his approach to women in combat. We'll get the latest on the transition ahead from Bloomberg's Mike Dorning here in Washington. Donald Trump, as we told you, has chosen Linda McMahon to run or dismantle the Department of Education. Coming up, we bring you an important conversation with Arne Duncan, the former Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. And I'm glad to say our signature panel is back together today. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with the analysis for the duration. And it all follows a look at Wall Street. Let's get you up to date on the markets right now with Charlie Pellet in New York. Charlie, how's it look?
Right now we have got big tech tumbling. Small caps are surging. Joe Matthew, happy Thursday to you. Right to the numbers with the S&P up 9 to put it all in context, up by about 0.2% right now. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 351, up 0.8%, while NASDAQ in the red, down 96, drop there of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 Index, so up 1.5%. The 10-year 4.41%, the 2-year 4.33%. Gold up $11 the ounce to $26.62, up by about 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, $69.65 on WTI. Bitcoin 97,000 on this Thursday, up 2.8%, 97,130 right now on Bitcoin. President-elect Donald Trump still fleshing out his economic team. Trump's former top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, was on Bloomberg television and radio this morning, and he says it makes sense that this pick for Treasury Secretary is taking time.
He ran an economic agenda campaign. This is in his opinion, this is one of the most important, if not the most important pick he is going to make. So getting it right is important.
Gary Cohn, now vice chair of IBM, interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. The Justice Department and a group of states are proposing major changes to Alphabet's Google, including a forced sale of the company's Chrome web browser after a landmark ruling that the tech giant illegally monopolized online search. Alphabet shares down now by 6.1%. After earnings, NVIDIA down 1.6%, and reporting after the close of trading today, we will be hearing from Intuit. Recapping, S&P higher now by 0.2%, up 9 points. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Lots going on in Washington. Back we go. Once again, your host here is Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, sir, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. We'll have more from Charlie on the markets as we make our through the program today. Great to have you with us on Bloomberg TV, on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. Don't worry, I'll get that straight. We'll have our TV audience with us in our second hour. If you want to find us on YouTube, search Bloomberg Business News Live, and voila, you will be with us in the studio. So welcome to Little Friday. We're talking today about a lot of the same things we were yesterday, just with a new wrinkle. That's the way this goes now. The slow drip in the transition. It's actually been dripping pretty quickly, but we get spoiled around here in Washington. It wasn't until, as we were reminded this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance, Gary Cohn reminding us it was not until after Thanksgiving that the economic team was rolled out in the first Trump administration, and everyone's starting the newscast with still waiting for a Treasury secretary. So let's just park Treasury for a minute, and we're going to focus with Bloomberg's Mike Dorning on what is happening today in the U.S. Senate, because he's walking the halls right now meeting with senators. That is Donald Trump's pick for defense secretary. Yeah, we'll get to Matt Gaetz in a moment, but Pete Hegseth is having his day today, meeting with Republican senators who will be, of course, deciding on his confirmation. And this comes just hours after a police report was made public. This happened late last night, with new details emerging over accusations by a woman that Hegseth sexually assaulted her during a conference in 2017. This is a case that ended up in a paid settlement by Mr. Hegseth. Of course, a media personality, is a Fox News, I guess we call commentator, if not anchor, and so, you know, non-disclosures and the whole thing. There are some senators who have questions about this, as well as his approach to running the Pentagon, which would include, according to him, firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and disallowing women from serving in combat. Mike Dorning has covered many transitions, and we're lucky to have him on this one. Bloomberg Politics reporter and editor. Great to see you, Mike, with our eyes here on the Senate. This is part of the deal, right? You get your Sherpa, they walk you around, you meet with the senators, but there's a lot of stuff in the air here, and reporters have a lot of questions. How awkward or not are these conversations?
Pretty awkward. I mean, when you have a police report about a rape claim and a lot of documentation from a rape kit and fairly specific allegations, that's pretty atypical for the defense secretary. I gotta say. True.
Donald Trump, though, seems unmoved by this, much like Matt Gaetz. So we're going to go through this process. Do you see Pete Hegseth getting to the confirmation hearings before this is all aired out?
It's hard to say on these things. I do think that there are potential problems for him ahead. You have some, one Republican senator, Joni Ernst, who's been someone who is a female veteran who has been concerned about how sexual assaults are handled in the military. This might not be like a good omen for her. There are other people. Susan Collins, she was asked about it today. She said she, wasn't keeping up on this news and she dodged the question. But all it takes is 4 Republican senators to say this is a bridge too far. That said, they all want to be loyal to Trump. Trump demands a lot of loyalty from senators, but even any president, his party is going to be, it's always a case in transition. His party wants him to get his nominees in, especially at the beginning.
You mentioned Joni Ernst could be a key figure in how this works out.
I think that's kind of underappreciated because she's not usually someone who would be breaking with Trump, but this, you don't know. This could be something that would
as a veteran herself.
A veteran and someone who's concerned about sexual assault in the military.
That's been a real cause for her. Does Pete Hegseth, do we assume, stand by all of these positions? You could show up for the confirmation hearing and say, oh, I never really meant that about women in combat, and that changes the narrative, or is this really about the police report?
I think it would be more about the police report, but it could be cumulative. And he did, by the way, did say today that in his view, he was cleared of these allegations.
That's right. And we should note that that's the case for both Hegseth and Matt Gaetz. They claim that all of these accusations, that's right, and the Department of Justice chose not to charge Gaetz. What do you make of this ethics committee situation now? They emerged from a meeting yesterday. It was a pretty long one, apparently, with no consensus. This is something that they will have to hash out, or this, in fact, is now going to the floor based on a privileged resolution by Sean Casten. The whole House will decide this? Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, that's how I expect excuse me, where I expect it will go. They're going to vote on it on the floor, and you've already seen sort of key bits of evidence leak out.
That will likely be after Thanksgiving. You get the clock on 2 days, and they're leaving town today.
It will now be definitely after Thanksgiving.
Is that right? Okay.
This morning it was likely. In the last hour or so, it became definitely.
We've got news from Mike Dorning. So that's a big deal. The House will decide whether this is made public. Senators are going to get this either way, though, right?
One would think they would get it in some shape or form.
Whether it's privately or in a SCIF or something, they're going to have access to. This
now,
is about making it public.
Usually, this is another issue. They would get this anyway from the FBI report.
Correct, yes.
But
that's
now,
a whole other story.
There's a possibility, and the Trump people are suggesting they won't do FBI background checks. And that is like a whole nother source of disagreement amongst some senators with
to be using essentially a private security firm instead of the Federal Bureau.
And obviously private security firms, though they can do pretty robust investigations,
Well, that's right.
they don't have the same ability to just get everything from the Justice Department that the FBI does.
There's the difference. But we all know that MAGA has a major allergy to the FBI. So will this be a new normal created by Donald Trump? Every now and then there's outrage, and then it becomes the new normal where presidents will get their own firm because nobody trusts the FBI.
I mean, I wouldn't have expected that the disagreement with having an FBI check would in and of itself be a problem, but it's when it's combined with these allegations surrounding Gates, Hegseth, that it could be a problem and not become a new norm.
Well, so this is taking up most of the attention, Hegseth and Gates. Tulsi Gabbard, we have yet to start delving into this, although I think it's interesting, the bill that was proposed today by Elizabeth Warren that would force all of these nominees to reveal any work they've done with foreign governments. We'll get there. The education department is one that we're not talking about enough. After Linda McMahon was tapped to be education secretary, Mike, it'll basically be her job, if we believe Donald Trump, to dismantle the education department. How does she start on that project?
I mean, I guess you would start, if they were serious about it, in figuring out how you would handle all these functions that the education department has.
I don't think most people are aware of what those are.
Most of the funding for disabled students in the United States comes, like 85% of it, from the federal government. I don't think you'd want to like just cut off funding for disabled students in America. There's also like a lot of funding that goes to low-income school districts that flows through the education department. Student loan program, they administer that. You'd want to figure out how you would handle those things.
Most people are not aware of a lot of this. They think that the education department is kind of forcing critical race theory down the throats of local jurisdictions, and as Trump says, just give it back to the states. Is that even a real possibility without the support of Congress?
You can't get rid of the department without the support of Congress, but Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration, regardless of whether they get rid of the Department of Education, can pull back on these things. Then they can do it pretty quickly.
Interesting.
And I would expect, regardless, one of the first things she would do would be countermand some of the DEI things.
Yep, that's right.
And countermand some of the guidance on transgender. That doesn't require getting rid of anything. That's just, government regulatory authority.
Maybe tweaking a voucher program based on some of the things we're hearing. We've got a lot to learn still, Mike. Thank you for helping us distill it today. This will all be probably different by the time we're back on the late edition of Balance of Power on 5 o'clock as we do follow Pete Hegseth through the corridors of power in the U.S. Senate. Important meetings that he's holding today, and we'll let you know how some of them go. We're told that he's also been speaking with reporters up there, and if he makes any news, we'll, of course, bring it to you here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. I want to hold the bead on this conversation about the Education Department and what we were just talking about with Mike, because we have a special guest coming up. No stranger to Bloomberg, Arnie Duncan, the former Secretary of Education in the Obama administration, is going to be with us here for a conversation on what this would look like and what exactly the Education Department does. Stay with us on Balance of Power and subscribe to the podcast. These are the conversations you can listen to on the way home, even if we're not live. Find us at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you do that stuff. Arnie Duncan is on the way in next on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Big tech rattled as that fierce rally in NVIDIA hits a speed bump. NVIDIA shares after earnings down 1.3%. Right now we have got the Dow and the S&P both higher. The NASDAQ Composite Index in the red. NASDAQ trading lower by 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 Index now unchanged on the day. To put it all in context, S&P up by about 0.2%. The Dow up 0.8%. S&P higher by 14 now, 59.31. 10-year yield at 4.41%, 4.41 now on the 10-year. The 2-year, 4.33%. Gold up $15 the ounce. Spot gold up by 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 69.64 barrel on WTI. Bitcoin now at 97,475. Bitcoin up by 3.2%. The top U.S. consumer watchdog, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, will supervise Apple and other major tech firms that offer digital wallets and payment apps, finalizing a proposal from last year with several changes. Apple shares, little change now, down less than 0.1%. Alphabet shares down by just about 5.6%. Again, NVIDIA after earnings down 1.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington once again. Your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, sir. Keeping our hands on the markets every day here, live from New York as we cover politics live from Washington. And we'll get back to Charlie a little bit later this hour to see how the Thursday trade is progressing. Thanks for being with us here on the fastest show in politics. Picking up a conversation that we were having earlier this hour with Mike Dorning about the mission that has been laid out for the incoming, presuming she is confirmed, Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. And it has nothing to do with wrestling. His promise, of course, to dismantle the department, to get rid of the Department of Education and, quote unquote, send it back to the states, is something that we want to explore with someone who has run the department. As always, we try to bring you practitioners, people with experience, voices of experience here on Bloomberg, which is why we're glad to have Arne Duncan with us today. He was the U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. He's now managing partner at Emerson Collective. And Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. I appreciate the time, and I'm glad to have a couple of moments with you because we do have some questions, and it's clear to us that most Americans don't really have a great sense of what the Department of Education does. So if it were in fact removed or quote unquote sent back to the states, what would families, what would students lose?
Well, first of all, I think it's almost impossible that he's going to eliminate the Department of Education. I honestly think that's just another empty campaign promise. And the fact is, you know, the vast majority of funding K-12 actually comes from the states and local communities and districts. So send it back to the states. That's where the action already is. But your question is a good one. What does the department actually do? And I'll give you a couple of examples. It works very, very hard to make sure hundreds of thousands, millions of young children have access to high-quality pre-K, and getting our babies off to a great start is arguably the most important thing we can do. On the K-12 side, lots of funding for children with special needs, children with disabilities. That's desperately important, 7.5 million children. Lots of funding for children who live below the poverty line. At the higher education side, obviously does a tremendous amount to make college more accessible and more affordable. So sort of whether it's from babies to folks in college, the Department of Education plays a critical role. And to remove opportunity from children, from families, obviously makes no sense to me whatsoever.
What would it mean for funding for disabled students, Secretary?
Well, it's again, 7.5 million children with disabilities. And last time I checked, those are children whose families, some vote Democratic, some vote Republican. It just doesn't matter. And to see that funding disappear, to make sure that children now have access to a free and fair public education, that did not used to be the case. Many local districts used to discriminate and keep children with disabilities out of their public schools. It took the federal Department of Education, it took the intervention at the federal level to make sure children had that access. To take that away, that's not going to fly with parents. That's not, it hurt children, it hurt families. Honestly, it hurt the Republican Party. So, my best advice to them would be to not even think about doing anything to hurt our most vulnerable children, whether they're children with disabilities children with special needs, children who live below the poverty line. Those are the kids that need the best education we can provide them. They don't need something less than that.
Mr. Secretary, I hate to interrupt you, but we have some breaking news that I need to mention. I'd love for you to just stand by for one moment as I tell you and our audience that we have news on the former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who is apparently withdrawing his name from consideration to be the next Attorney General. Matt Gaetz on the X profile. I had excellent meetings with senators yesterday. He writes that he appreciates their thoughtful feedback, incredible support. While the momentum was strong, it is clear. Matt Gaetz writes, quote, "My confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition." He says there's no time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle, therefore withdrawing my name from consideration to serve as Attorney General. He says Trump's DOJ must be in place and ready on day one. At 12:27 p.m. Eastern Time, Matt Gaetz, the former congressman, he resigned his seat for this opportunity, is no longer in the running to be the Attorney General. We're going to have a lot more on this with our political panel. Rick Davis and G.D. Shanzano are with us coming up here as we spend time with Arnie Duncan, the former Secretary of Education. You can weigh in on that, by the way. Arnie, I don't know if you choose to, but you've been through the confirmation process, and there have been a lot of questions about some of the names that have been brought forth. Does this tell you anything about the senators who are going to make the decision, have been actually considering their next move here to see Matt Gaetz drop out this quickly?
Well, that obviously had to happen. And, unfortunately, he and frankly, so many other potential cabinet nominees by President Trump, one commonality, one common theme is that many of them have allegations of sexual abuse and being sexual predators. And for me, it's just mind-boggling. It's stunning that folks of this character or lack thereof are being considered for cabinet posts. So that was the right thing to do. He never had a chance. And hopefully, again, maybe they'll pick somebody worse, and you don't know what's going to happen here. But to have someone who has broken so many laws that has preyed upon young girls, having him somehow be the Attorney General of the United States, it boggles the mind.
Well, instant reaction from Arnie Duncan. What do you remember from that experience, walking the halls of the Senate, meeting with senators? What happens when you go into these offices for the sit-down?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's what's so sad to me. What I honestly, feel is that what President like Trump and others are trying to do is really to weaponize and politicize education. And I always say education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue or nonpartisan issue. There's nothing left or right or Republican and Democrat about more babies having access to pre-K and more kids reading at grade level and raising high school graduation rates and trying to lead the world in college completion. So I worked with all of my Republican colleagues, spent time with them, visited their communities. I think my confirmation, I think it was unanimous, and felt very grateful that I had that kind of bipartisan support, because I think people understood that there was nothing political about me or about my mission to give kids a better chance at life. And somehow we have totally lost that. It doesn't mean we don't have legitimate differences in terms of policy disagreements. You're always going to have that. But I appreciated the chance to work with my Republican colleagues, congressmen, senators, governors. The confirmation process was definitely harrowing. I was a new kid, new to D.C. and new to the ways, but was treated beyond fairly, thoughtfully, with consideration. And I tried to return that level of respect to the folks I worked with.
I remember that very well, as a matter of fact, and you were kind to come visit us when I was working in satellite radio for one of your first town hall conversations, and how your life must have changed and how the lives of all of these nominees will change. I can't begin to imagine, but while we have a couple of minutes left with you, I want to drill down a little bit more on what we were talking about, because while we did hear promises to eliminate the department, you don't seem to buy that, and I don't think Congress will either. We have some direction from the America First Policy Institute that has proposed changes on behalf of the Trump transition team, including stopping schools from, quote, promoting inaccurate and unpatriotic concepts, unquote, about American history surrounding institutionalized racism. This is critical race theory, I presume they're referring to. Secretary, what would that mean by the direction of a Trump-run Department of Education?
Right. And again, I just have to repeat myself. I hate the weaponization. I hate the politicization of anything having to do with education, because it's so critical to our nation. What they do is they attack any three-letter acronym. So call it CRT, call it DEI, call it SEL. They attack that. Those aren't the issues that people are worried about. What are the real issues? We have tens of millions of children who are very far behind academically coming out of the pandemic. We have to help them catch up as fast as we can through high dosage tutoring. While we have kids that are chronically absent who haven't come back to school, we have to go find them, knock on doors, bring them in. We need to attract and retain the best teachers we can. This is a very tough time to be in education. We have to continue to raise high school graduation rates, because if you drop out of high school today, you're basically condemned to poverty and social failure. There are no good jobs out there for you. We have to educate our way to a better economy. We have to continue to make college more accessible and affordable. Those are the kinds of real issues that touch real parents and real children and real communities that whoever leads the Department of Education should be focused on, not these distractions. They sort of manufacture fear about things that don't make sense instead of spending time on things that do. And if you talk to parents, what are parents worried about today? They're worried about their children's mental health. They're worried about bullying in schools, and they're worried about school shootings. And whether you attack the department or dismantle the department, do whatever, that has nothing to do with helping parents and helping children be successful. The vast majority of parents in America, they don't care. They could care less about the Department of Education. They care about their local school. They care passionately about their child. That's where the focus has to be, not on these political, made-up, divisive issues. It really is disheartening. It's so troubling to me.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty in answering these questions. Lastly, what do you think of Linda McMahon at the top of the agency? There's no reason to believe that she will do all of the things that Donald Trump suggests, but you've got someone with no background in education. Remembering, of course, you ran the school system in Chicago before you had that job.
Yeah, and I guess my bigger concern, and obviously I don't know her, have never met her, but my biggest concern is that if you look at a number of his cabinet nominees, including starting with Matt Gaetz, these are not people who anybody can trust. And I really worry that he is very intentionally trying to create distrust of all institutions. He's done that with the media. He's done that with science. He's doing that with his cabinet nominees, trying to create distrust in our own government. I worry he's trying to create distrust in our neighborhood schools. And that, unfortunately, is what authoritarian leaders do, is they try and sow distrust in any institution and become the only source of knowledge, the only source of truth. So again, I've never met her, don't have any sense. Obviously, she has no background to do this job. The story was that she wanted to be the Commerce Secretary, but the guy who he picked to do that gave him more money. So this was her consolation prize. I just hope she comes in, listens to children, listens to teachers, listens to parents, and does the right thing to help America. I always say our military is our best defense, but a great education system is our best offense. I truly hope we don't lose the plot here, because the consequences for our children, families, and nation would be extraordinarily serious.
Spoken from someone who's run the Department of Education, Arnie Duncan. Appreciate your time very much. With breaking news today from Washington, the former Congressman Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration to be the next Attorney General. We'll have more from our panel next. Rick and Jeannie are on the way here on Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Matt Gaetz is withdrawing from consideration to be Attorney General in a major defeat for conservatives who wanted him to dramatically overhaul the Justice Department in President-elect Donald Trump's administration. Joe Matthew will have a lot more coming up right here on Balance of Power. The Dow now up 470 points, up 1.1%. The S&P up 28, up by 0.5%. But we've got NASDAQ now little changed. It is down 2 points, a drop there of less than 0.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index, meanwhile, turning around, up by 0.3%. 10-year, 4.40%. The 2-year, 4.32%. Gold up $18 the ounce, up by about 0.7%. 26.68 on the precious metal right now. Brent up 1%. Brent crude now at 73.35 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate 69.50, up by 1.1%. A variety of reports today on the health of America's economy, and they are mixed. With that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
U.S. manufacturing continues to seesaw. The index of leading economic indicators registered the weakest showing in 4 months in October, mainly reflecting fewer factory orders. The labor market is holding up, though. Weekly jobless claims dropped to the lowest since April. In the U.S. property market, existing home sales rose in October on a dip in mortgage rates. Rates, though, have jumped since then. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, repeating our top story, Matt Gaetz withdrawing from consideration to be Attorney General. A lot more coming up in just a moment on Balance of Power. Recapping, S&P up 27, up by 0.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues now. Lots going on. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Yes, indeed. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, and good to have you with us here on the fastest show in politics. It's the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. If you were with us in the throes of our conversation with Arnie Duncan, and you might have heard Charlie Pellet just mention, we do have a big breaker here, and it's a redhead on the terminal. Matt Gaetz is out. Of course, it's a Twitter announcement, or X, as we now call it. Elon Musk's platform brings us the news again. Matt Gaetz says he had excellent meetings with senators yesterday, but he's become a distraction. Quote, "It is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition," he says. "No time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle." And the scuffle was already well underway. It was at this time yesterday that we were talking about the Ethics Committee in the U.S. House meeting at an undisclosed location to vote on whether to release its report into Matt Gaetz and the salacious allegations against him that he has denied. No resolution, no agreement, split down the middle, report still under wraps. But there's now a Democratic-led effort in the U.S. House to have this made public. Sean Casten, who was with us just 2 days ago, Democrat from Illinois, had some pretty strong words about Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump in our conversation, has brought a privileged resolution to the floor, easy for me to say, that will force a vote, a full House vote, on whether to make the ethics report public. Now, that starts the clock. You remember how this works. We wonk out here on Balance of Power on a 2-day countdown, so that means it's going to happen after Thanksgiving. Lawmakers will come back. They will vote on this. But maybe now it doesn't matter. We talked to, by the way, no fan of Matt Gaetz, the congressman from New York, Mike Lawler, Republican, talked to us just ahead of the news of Matt Gaetz dropping out, just to get a sense of where people's heads were. This is a Republican again talking. Here's Congressman Lawler.
President Trump is certainly entitled, as president-elect, to nominate whoever he sees fit to serve in that role. And the Senate obviously has the process by which to confirm. I stand by everything I've ever said about Matt Gaetz. I don't waver in that belief. Do I think he's the right person? No. But ultimately, that will be a decision by the Senate.
Well, not anymore. Let's assemble our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Senior Democracy Fellow, Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst. And I'm glad to say that Rick Davis is back with us today, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Rick, this was a quick one. I don't know how this compares in history, but the withdrawal came within days of Matt Gaetz being announced. What do you make of this development?
Well, I think the key thing is he withdraws within 24 hours after his meeting in the Senate yesterday. And we can only speculate that it obviously didn't go according to his plan. I think there was plenty of senators, probably more than he would need, to reject his confirmation, express serious reservations about his fitness for office. And I think that he took that literally and didn't want to walk the plank. Senators were saying things like, this is going to be much worse than the Kavanaugh hearings, which we all remember were sort of out of control screaming fest. So rather than put himself through that and wind up without a job, I think he's taken the best route and withdrawn. Now, we haven't heard the last of Matt Gaetz. I mean, he withdrew from the House of Representatives last Wednesday, and now he needs a job. So it'll be interesting to see what the Trump team comes up with next.
Does need a job, and I think they're going to need a senator in Florida if Marco Rubio is confirmed as head of the State Department. Jeannie, these must have been some pretty rough meetings yesterday, unless Matt Gaetz got some phone calls last night, or are you among those who think that this whole thing was a setup to begin with to get him out of whatever the ethics committee found in their investigation?
No, I have no evidence to suggest this was a setup. It seems to be in keeping with the way Trump operates. And, to me, this entire thing, if it wasn't bad enough within the last few hours, as we heard, that, he's doing things like transporting women to New York City, going to see Pretty Women on Broadway, the ultimate show and movie about a, hooker with a heart of gold. And he's paying these women on Venmo. I mean, it jumped the shark so long ago, it became outrageous to think he could have survived in this contest, or that Republicans would have wanted to put this thing out in the public. But, Rick is onto something. He needs a job, right? He can skirt Senate confirmation if they put him in the White House. But don't forget, he was elected to the House of Representatives. He only resigned from the seat he currently holds. He can move himself right back into the House of Representatives. And, he's a flamethrower, so he may not mind so much, because as of now, we know so much of what was in that report already. If ethics decides to pick it up again, he could be there to make Republicans' lives miserable. So he's got a lot of options, and it's certainly not the last time we've heard of Matt Gaetz.
Wow. A lot there from Jeannie. We just heard from Donald Trump, Truth Social. I greatly appreciate the recent efforts. I'm reading directly from his post. Of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. Donald Trump writes he was doing very well, but at the same time did not want to be a distraction for the administration, for which he has much respect. Matt has a wonderful future. Donald Trump says, I look forward to watching all of the great things he will do. Does that sound like somebody who wants to bring Gaetz into the White House, Rick?
Well, I think he has already made that pretty clear that he wanted him in the cabinet. There are plenty of sub-cabinet level jobs that won't get the scrutiny that Attorney General would have brought onto him. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to just cut him loose. Frankly, he's probably more dangerous to Donald Trump without a job in the administration than he is with one. That way they can at least keep track of what he's up to. But you mentioned it earlier. There is going to be a vacancy, in the United States Senate from Florida. That's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities that Matt Gaetz would show up in that same caucus that just beat him up yesterday. Won't be the first senator that comes up there with some wounds, but it would be certainly a rock thrown against the glass of the Republican caucus in the Senate if he winds up a colleague.
Wow. Jeannie, this has taken the light off of Pete Hegseth today. Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense nominee, is actually walking the halls of the Senate, meeting with senators today, as Matt Gaetz did yesterday. And I don't know about the timing here, but it's just last night that a police report came out from Monterey, California, about his experience with a woman in 2017 who accused him of sexual assault. It goes further than that, Jeannie, and I'm sure you've read this. The records released show the woman told an emergency room nurse that she may have been drugged and was then assaulted by a man she later identified as Pete Hegseth. Where are we going with this nomination? What are these meetings today?
He was in those meetings today. The report is very damning. He said something that at least caught my attention today, speaking to reporters. When he was asked about that report, he said something like, as far as the media is concerned, I have been cleared. And it was that preface as far as the media is concerned, that is very strange way to preface that. Of course, he wasn't cleared. He just was not charged with this, and he did then pay off this woman. The question I think for Donald Trump and the transition team here once again is, number one, did he tell them about this, or did he pull the wool over their eyes? It's one thing if he is not honest with, say, viewers on Fox News for those years he's on there, but it's another thing if he didn't tell the transition team, who of course has put their own hands tied behind their back by not using the FBI to investigate and to vet these folks. So, it's all part of that. But I think the big thing about Pete Hegseth, even more damning, if you can say that, or equally damning, is his absolute lack of qualifications to run this department by any stretch of the imagination. And that's true of many of these nominees, but Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz take the cake for that. And that's what I think Democrats need to focus on.
Well, it's crazy we're talking about this. I even get a special background for it if you're with us on YouTube. Rick, I'm running out of questions for you guys here. Yes, we have the police report, but we have something else. Maybe I should say we have someone else, Rick. Someone actually, I think named Joni Ernst. Pete Hegseth says women should not be allowed in combat. There are going to be some Republicans, including Joni Ernst, a combat veteran on the Judiciary panel, who have a problem with that approach. Rick, what is more challenging to Hegseth's confirmation? The police report, which, by the way, he denies the allegations, or his position, for instance, on women in combat?
Well, I think you adequately made the point, Joe. It's his past position. He wouldn't be the first cabinet appointee to go to his confirmation hearing and do a little bit of flip-flopping. I was at a national security conference yesterday, and this was addressed by a lot of the 4-stars that were there, and their point was, we can be gender blind, and if you are ready for the job, you should fill it. And I wouldn't be surprised that that's the comments that he makes if he gets as far as getting a confirmation hearing. It won't be just Joni Ernst going after him on these issues. This is a bipartisan approach to the military that has been, frankly, rewarded by enhancing our security with women in combat. And he's not likely to hold on to that stream if he wants to get through confirmation unscathed.
As we spend time with Rick and Jeannie, our signature panel here, if you're with us on YouTube today, I'm now in the Upside Down. Oh, no, look, we're back in Washington. Jeannie, what's your take on this? The police report or the position on women in combat create a greater challenge to the nominee for SecDef?
Can I have a third choice of all of the above and
Please.
More?
Okay.
You mentioned Joni Ernst, and it's a great example. Let's look at Tammy Duckworth. She is a double amputee vet, and she is going to face this man who has said in the past, and we'll have to hear what he says if he actually gets to confirmation hearings, that women shouldn't serve in combat. I wonder how that's going to go over with Senator Duckworth. And, he can claim that these positions are in the past, so he will have to defend those. If he decides to waffle on them and change his mind, he's going to have to defend that. But there's far more where that is. And I go back to the fact that Pete Hegseth, for all of his military service, has never, ever shown the ability to run an organization as big as the Department of Defense in terms of the budget, in terms of the personnel. And so the qualifications issue alone is one that has to be addressed in addition to all these other things. And this is what's so concerning to so many people in the defense area, is the fact that he has absolutely no background in this.
Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, our signature panel, will be back not long from now in our second hour of Balance of Power as we welcome our global television audience to the conversation. Amid breaking news today, Matt Gaetz is out as the nominee for Attorney General. He withdrew his name. He did so on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Since we took air at 12 noon Eastern time, this happened roughly a half an hour ago, and we're going to have much more on this breaking story, and the rest of the transition. Coming up in hour 2, Congressman Don Beyer will join us, the Democrat from Virginia. We'll, of course, have Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and we're also going to bring you a special conversation with Ken Griffin from New York. All part of hour 2 of the fastest show in politics. We'll get Ken Griffin's input on the transition and, of course, analysis from our signature panel. Stay with us. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next, right here on Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Matt Gaetz is out. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the former congressman withdraws his name from nomination to be the next Attorney General of the United States. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, the news is moving pretty quickly today. Matt Gaetz says he has become a distraction, of course, referring to the Ethics Committee investigation into him, a report that we have still not seen.
Well, and that's one of the questions in the aftermath of this news. What will happen to the report looking into the former congressman? Because he is right now former, at least of this Congress. But that gets us to our second question. He resigned from the 118th Congress. When the 119th, which he was elected to, re-elected to, takes its seats in January, will he try to claim his? And then third, who's going to be the AG nominee instead? What does Donald Trump, the president-elect, do next?
Will there be another announcement today? That's something that we're asking as well. Could Matt Gaetz be in contention for a Senate seat in Florida should it open if Marco Rubio becomes the next Secretary of State? But it looks like we have breaking news, not from the transition, well, I guess maybe indirectly at the SEC.
Yeah, the current chairman of the SEC, Gary Gensler, is planning to step down from the agency in January. This is perhaps not all too surprising, as Donald Trump had pledged on the campaign trail to fire Chairman Gensler from his post when he takes office. But effective in January, he will be stepping down as the chairman of the SEC. And that brings us to another outstanding question, is who is going to be leading that regulatory agency and the others? You can include the CFTC and others here too in this second Trump administration, reminding us that we still have many more names to be named by the president-elect during this transition, even as some of those names pull themselves out of contention, as Matt Gaetz has done today.
This is why we do this every day. We learn this together frequently in real time, and the reaction in the crypto space is deliberate. Bitcoin Grayscale, Bitcoin Mini Trust right now up almost 4%. Kaylee will keep tabs, of course, on the reaction here. SEC Chair Gensler stepping down in January when Washington turns red.
Bitcoin right on the cusp of $98,000 right now. So let's get a check on that and the other things moving in financial markets today and turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Fast day of developments in U.S. markets. You mentioned Bitcoin, 98,020 right now, pushing higher, up 3.8% today. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, what a turnaround we have seen there. At one point, the S&P was down 0.5%, now up by almost 0.6%. The S&P up 32. We've got the Dow up 544, up 1.3%. NASDAQ up 5 now, little changed, up less than 0.1%. Russell 2000 index up by 1.8%. Bottom line here, stocks overcoming early losses. The 10-year 4.41%, the 2-year 4.32%. Gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude below 70 now, 69.50 a barrel, up 1.1%. We wrap things up right where we began with Bitcoin, 98,033, pushing higher, up 3.8%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues. Lots going on. They've got you covered. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. A lot going on indeed here in Washington as we digest the news that former Congressman Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration to be the next Attorney General of the United States under the Trump administration. The president-elect, of course, going to have to name someone else to serve in that role instead. We'll await for news on that. He has posted on True Social in the last 20 minutes that he greatly appreciated the recent efforts of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. He goes on to say, I look forward to watching all of the great things he will do, but again, it will not be serving in this role. The question is going to be, what role does he serve in the 119th Congress, Joe? Because he did resign from the one that is sitting now, but he was reelected to serve another term beginning in January.
Yeah, let's see if we can get any sunlight on that matter. Wendy Benjaminson joins us now from Washington, Bloomberg, senior editor. If you're elected to the 119th, does that mean you can resign your seat from the 118th and still show up in January?
Well, it depends on it's the House. It's not going to be straightforward or simple. It's going to be as arcane as it can be. We've just seen the text of Matt Gaetz's resignation letter to the House, and it says, I hereby resign from the 118th Congress, and I do not intend to take the oath for the 119th, the one that comes in early January, suggesting that he assumed he was going to be Attorney General and didn't need this job anymore, right? But now that he's not going to be the Attorney General, he can go and ask the Speaker or whatever committee runs this to rescind that. then that might have to be considered by the House. He's not that popular. He could run for his own seat in a special election if Florida wanted to do it that way. He could be appointed to the Senate seat opened by Mark Rubio. I mean, there's all sorts of ways Matt Gaetz is not done in Washington. Although it sounds like the conversations he had with senators suggested that, as we say in Texas, they smelled toast.
Well, so it's one thing to consider whether Matt Gaetz is done with Washington or done in Washington. Another to consider if Washington is going to be done with him, specifically the work ongoing in the House Ethics Committee in regard to the report looking into allegations of sexual misconduct, sex trafficking, drug use. What happens if he's not a member of the House, he's no longer a cabinet nominee? Does that mean this ethics report, Wendy, is never actually going to see the light of day, at least through formal means?
Right. It probably won't. One, you have a Republican Congress coming in. You have a Republican House that wants to show its fealty to Donald Trump. And also, they have a long to-do list. They're going to move on. And the Republican-led Ethics Committee may turn to some Democrats that they've had their eye on. They may just say forget about it and let this thing go. On the other hand, if things are really bad, they may go ahead and release it and censure him as they did with George Santos, who was a Republican at a Republican Congress.
He showed up at the Ethics Committee meeting yesterday, which was pretty remarkable as Congressman Lawler handed out water to the reporters who were waiting.
Who were getting faint.
We heard from Chip Roy, Freedom Caucus, who said what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You released this report on a former Republican member. You're going to be hearing a lot about former Democratic members. What's he talking about?
I have no idea, to be perfectly honest with you.
That would still require the Ethics Committee to vote to release its own material.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I don't think there are any Democrats under investigation right now. There may be. Maybe he means in the future it's a threat.
I think he was referring to former members who may have had cases not exposed.
And there's plenty of those going back over the years.
I guess so.
What would be the point, really?
So maybe this is done.
Yeah.
Well, it's entirely possible, and that would be something to consider in the kind of medium term here. In the more near term, Wendy, who's Trump going to pick to be the AG now? He's obviously nominated a deputy in Todd Blanche. Could he get upgraded? What's the short list?
That's what I'm thinking. Who knows with Trump world what he might do. He might try again with someone who's going to go crack heads in the Justice Department, as Matt Gaetz promised to do in his interview. But Todd Blanche, it was odd that you would announce who the deputy AG was even before you've finalized who your attorney general is. So it could be that Todd Blanche was the fail-safe, was the now I'll nominate him to be attorney general because he expected Matt Gaetz to be knocked down. But it's Trump world. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen next?
All right. Yeah, certainly we didn't see this one coming necessarily today. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson hopping on with us on this breaking news. Thank you so much. And we want to get more on this now as we dissect what exactly has happened here and what it means, and turn to our signature political panel. Jeannie Shan Zaino is with us. She is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Stone Court Capital partner Rick Davis. They are Democrat and Republican analysts, respectively. Rick, I would love to hear from you here just on timing. While we all knew the writing might be on the wall with this one, it looked like it was going to be a steep uphill climb for Gaetz to be confirmed. He was just on Capitol Hill yesterday with the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance trying to fight the fight here. Why give it up when November's not even over?
Yeah, it was pretty precipitous. We can only speculate that the meeting with the senators was not positive. If you saw Lindsey Graham's reaction coming out of the Capitol last night, he was not particularly happy. And of course, he would be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee that would process that hearing in his committee. So I think he is a telling person who was, by the way, up until the end of yesterday, strongly supporting Matt Gaetz' confirmation. So he's another one who's probably been injured by this since he leaned in so hard on it. The reality is it's a little unusual because also Donald Trump was making phone calls to senators, which is not unusual into itself, but you would have thought he'd want to see how that meeting took place before he weighed in directly with the senators on that committee. So I'd say setback for Team Trump on their transition. They're going to have to fall back. I have no doubt that they were, up until this announcement, fully prepared to charge ahead with his confirmation, and now they're going to have to fall back and figure out who else to put up.
Jeannie, there was a Democratic-led effort, I should say is one because it's still underway, under privilege resolution to have a full House vote on whether to release formally, publicly, the Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz. Is there any point in pursuing that as the Democrat on our panel? Do you still want that to be made public?
I don't think there's a rush to do it. Certainly, the committee is going to meet again next week on the 5th if they keep to that schedule. And, you know, I think it's important that they do work together and respect the rules of the House. And so I don't think there's any real reason to rush that out. But again, it depends on what happens with Matt Gaetz next. Where does he go? You know, does he fight Laura Trump to become senator of Florida? Does he come back to the House, as you were talking to Wendy about? Does he get into the White House, you know, skirting confirmation by the Senate? But I would say, you know, for all of Trump's bravado in this process, and his attempts to try to skirt around the confirmation process and talk about recess appointments and those kinds of things, it is to the credit of the Senate that whatever happened, they stood up, and the GOP in the Senate, and apparently were at least able to convince Matt Gaetz that this was a no-go. And that is a win for James Madison. So here to James Madison for giving us these checks and balances, because it is a win for him and for all of us.
Well, it might also be a win for Senator John Thune, the incoming majority leader, Rick, who was going to have to navigate what could have been a really tricky situation with this confirmation. And I wonder if this now opens a window for instead scrutiny and perhaps a little bit of pushback on the president-elect from the majority in the Senate in regard to other nominees, thinking here Pete Hegseth or Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, there seems to be a realization in Mar-a-Lago that these things could inure to the detriment of the president-elect. So, you know, pulling the plug this early on Matt Gaetz was, I think, a surprise to all. And I'm sure they are monitoring the media and the senators' reactions to other controversial cabinet picks that you've just described. So I think this is TBD. The good news about the Senate is they weren't the ones who had to pull the plug on Matt Gaetz. Certainly some in the caucus weren't happy with this. They made themselves known yesterday, probably enough to thwart the nomination if it came to a floor vote. But the reality is they were able to see his nomination pulled by his withdrawal without actually having to spend any political capital themselves. So they have plenty charged up. Majority Leader Thune is indicated that this process will move forward, different from some early indications that there might be a mass recess appointment of the cabinet. So we're learning as we go along with this new Trump cabinet, and it seems to be more balanced with the Senate than I think many observers thought it might be.
It seems we're learning more about Pete Hegseth as well, Jeannie, and I wonder your thoughts on how this breaking news about Matt Gaetz, the reaction he apparently got in the Senate yesterday, might inform what happens to Donald Trump's nominee for defense secretary. It was just last night, interesting timing, that a police report was made public, as we've been discussing, about accusations by a woman that Hegseth, she says, sexually assaulted her. There is some new information in here. As the records show, the woman told an emergency room nurse that she may have been drugged that night. This is something we were looking at in a vacuum until this Matt Gaetz headline broke today. What could this mean for Pete Hegseth?
You know, I think it is a reflection of the inadequate vetting that has gone on here, particularly in the case of Pete Hegseth. I mean, I can't imagine that they didn't realize about Matt Gaetz because that investigation had been going on in the House for so long. But Pete Hegseth, apparently the transition team was surprised to get this news about the payoff, and now yesterday the police report. So this is what happens. And, you know, Karl Rove said this yesterday: inadequate vetting, rushing, disregarding people's qualifications, thirst for revenge. All of those things have left a Trump team, which had a pretty good first week of nominees, with these really difficult nominees. And, you know, I think it's going to fall on J.D. Vance, who is the Sherpa. He was the Sherpa of Gates. He is now the Sherpa of Hegseth, to see what inroads they can make in the Senate rather. But there are very, very many questions in the Senate and in the defense area about Pete Hegseth, not just this, but his qualifications and his views. All of those things are going to come through in a confirmation process. And the question for the Trump team is, do they want to put themselves through this if there were more particularly salacious, things to come out?
With instant analysis to news that Matt Gaetz is withdrawing his name from nomination to be the next Attorney General. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature panel, thank you both so much as we add the voice of a congressman in Don Beyer, a member of the Democratic Conference in the U.S. House, Don Beyer of Virginia. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Congressman. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the day Matt Gaetz must have had in the U.S. Senate. But regarding the House, and I understand we're going to talk a bit later with your colleague, Sean Casten, who had a privileged resolution to force a floor vote on whether to make public the Ethics Committee investigation, the report into Matt Gaetz. Do you think that should still happen?
Yes, I do. Although there will be less pressure to do it now that he is no longer a candidate for Attorney General. Matt had alienated so many people on both sides of the aisle that we expected quite a few Republican votes to actually see the report. It's less important now unless he decides to come back. And he won the election. He resigned from this Congress, but he hasn't resigned from the next Congress yet. So this may be not moot yet.
Well, so Congressman, is it your understanding that he could just simply take that seat? Does he have to take the seat in order to then resign it? So does he have to show up on January 3rd? Just what exactly is the procedure here?
Kaylee, good question. And we relied on Joe Morelli, who's the Democrat who leads the House Administration Committee. And he basically said, we don't know. We've not really been in this position before. But it's not clear that he can resign a seat that he's not been sworn into yet. But if he doesn't show up, what happens then? In any case, I think an awful lot of people think that whether he serves or not, that the people have a right to know what that ethics report says. And certainly that's the way I will vote to release it.
We did hear from the aforementioned Sean Casten in a statement following the news of Matt Gaetz's withdrawal. While I welcome the news, he says, it remains important that the Gaetz report be made available to the American people. If he's not serving in Congress, Don Beyer, why would that be?
Well, part of it, Joe, is the larger picture that we have Pete Hegseth also, credibly accused of rape. We have some, I think it's in the double digits numbers of cabinet and sub-cabinet officials that are circulating right now that have had charges of sexual assault, including RFK Jr. That this seems to be the new qualification for Trump cabinet. I think the more we address this directly, and hopefully with the clear message that we want people who are have high integrity, that treat women with respect, treat each other with respect, should be part of what it means to be a cabinet member in this United States.
Well, and as we think about women here in particular, Congressman, I'm sure you've seen, as many of us had, the reports, the police reports specifically of the incident in 2017, allegations of sexual assault regarding a different cabinet nominee, the defense secretary designate Pete Hegseth. Now that some of the scrutiny will be taken off of Matt Gaetz, since he's withdrawn himself from consideration, it could put a greater spotlight on that individual in particular. Do you expect he will face an uphill battle to Senate confirmation over some of these very same issues you were just alluding to?
Very much so, Kaylee. And it begins with the sexual assault allegations, some of his family past. But it's going to quickly move on to the fact that a National Guardsman with service overseas, which we very much respect, has never managed an organization more than 30 people, moving on to one of the largest and most complicated organizations in the world. When you move in somebody like Lloyd Austin or Jim Mattis, who have managed in the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands That's a very different set of management and leadership skills than what Pete Hegseth has shown us so far. And what we mostly know of him is his advocacy for returning a Navy SEAL badge to somebody who shot a handcuffed man in the back of the head and was convicted of murder.
I don't know anything about that, Congressman, but I do want to ask you about the looming choice for Treasury Secretary. Is this something that you're concerned about because it's taken so long, even though we're pretty early in the game here, but following the names that you've seen already, a lot of folks with the aim of torching the agency that they've been put in charge of have been named by Donald Trump to the joy of many of his supporters. Are we going to get a name like that for Treasury based on who you're hearing?
Joe, my great concern is that not so much that a Treasury Secretary will try to tear down the U.S. dollar, but rather that he or she will buy into the Trump commitment to 10 and 20% tariffs on every one of our trading partners and 60% plus on the Chinese. We've already discovered the American people hate inflation, and yet he's about to do the most inflationary thing possible, which is drive up consumer prices all across our country. It would be wonderful if you would appoint a Treasury Secretary who would be a constraint on really bad economic policy that's coming out of the 2025 playbook and out of Donald Trump.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We appreciate your time. That is the Democratic Congressman representing Virginia's 8th District, Don Beyer, here with us on Balance of Power. And as we consider the still unclear or yet to be named Secretary of the Treasury, it does put a spotlight on the kind of policies that Treasury Secretary would be charged with carrying out during this second administration. Donald Trump, we understand here, is looking for someone who can properly communicate that policy and have credibility with Wall Street. And earlier on today, an important conversation took place with Bloomberg's very own Sonali Basak and one of the most powerful voices on Wall Street, Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, at the Economic Club of New York. And she began by asking him about this incoming administration. Let's listen.
We're weeks away from a new administration in the United States. From your perch, what's most on your mind?
That's a great starting question. So let's first talk about what has happened over the last couple of weeks. The American voters have said resoundingly that immigration and inflation are two of the most critical problems that our country faces. And immigration is an area that the Trump administration is going to be very focused on. And it's an area of real concern to me because much of our nation's success is rooted in our ability to attract the best and brightest from around the world to work for American firms and to start American firms. Roughly half of all the firms in the Silicon Valley that have been launched in the last 20 years are led by immigrants. And I would say roughly the majority of Citadel's leadership team is immigrants. These are people that have come to this country, they've left everything behind because they believe in the American dream and the opportunity that our country represents. And yet, I think everyone agrees that the chaos on the southern border represents a broken immigration policy where there's very little control over who comes into our country, whether they come here to pursue the American dream or for more nefarious reasons. I think there's widespread agreement across our country that we need to secure our southern border and that we need a far more orderly structure for immigration to America. So this has been a really important voice that the American voters have delivered to Washington. And I'm pleased to hear that voice, but I'd like to see Washington now execute on an immigration policy that is thoughtful, that protects this nation's great stature in the world of being the country you come to pursue your dreams. And on that note, for just a moment, I was in Europe last week and had a chance to talk to some of the most senior policy leaders in Europe. And do you know what they talk about? They talk about how Europe loses its best and brightest to America. they talk about how the Europeans have had a number of just absolute world-leading minds in AI, and how virtually all of them have left to come to America. We need to keep that position in the global war for talent. The second area that's very front and center on the minds of the American people is inflation, which I think ties into the economy holistically. And I think that for most voters, it's not clear what the right economic policy should be with a very fine, pointed pen. But they do appreciate that when your economy is at full growth potential, when unemployment is right around 4%, that is about as good as the economy should be, and yet inflation was running hot, and our deficit was running roughly 6 to 7%, which is a number that you would have last seen obviously during the COVID pandemic, and then prior to that in World War II. So at a moment in time where the US fiscal house should have been looking pretty strong, or in other words, our deficit, in the Clinton days was actually a surplus when the economic environment was similar. When the deficit should have been closer to zero and was running closer to 6, 7%, the American voter knows something's wrong in Washington. Now the challenge is, and this is, like you asked what I worry about, will Team Trump, will this administration be able to find a path to put America's fiscal house back in order? So that's one of my real concerns, because we cannot continue to run this level of profit, and that's a big issue.
So over the course of the next hour, we'll go into different policy measures, how you think they should be addressed. And also we'll shift gears and talk about the market implications as well and how you navigate around it. But let's start there. Let's start with the deficit, because prior to the election, you had the Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget saying that you would really have an administration with the proposed policies ahead that would add $7.5 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. How do you start to trim that fat? I mean, how do you start to bring that number down?
So here's the question. How much did both candidates run on a strategy of promise the world and then deliver reality post-election? I mean, neither party had a compelling story as to how they were going to put America's fiscal house in order. And I think it's very difficult to have judged either Vice President Harris or President Trump on the merits of their economic policy, because neither set forth a plan that was substantive, tangible, and would achieve the results that we need for the American people. And I think that's part of the reason that, for example, the Secretary of Treasury is so important, the role of the Senate, the role of the House. We're going to have to see the Republicans govern and make some very difficult decisions about where to cut, what tax cuts, if any, happen or are maintained. Like, we've got to put the fiscal house in order. And these are really unpopular decisions for politicians to make.
A big part of that $7.5 trillion projection really does come from tax cuts, more than you've seen in 2017. Do you think any of those can get done with where the deficit stands today? Of course, this administration is very different than when we saw Trump back then, given the size of the deficit ballooning.
So in both scenarios, Trump has inherited the following problem. American productivity is below where it needs to be for us to deliver on the promises that we have delivered to our retirees and our forthcoming retirees. Like, there's no way out of our current situation in terms of the promises that we've made other than to get American productivity up. I think in the first set of tax cuts, and to be clear, I think Trump made a bet. If we cut taxes, if we incentivize corporations and investors to take more risk, to put more money into R&D, to put more money into capital, to put more money into software and to modernize their businesses, we will get the productivity gains that we need. Now, we'll never know the answer to that because the pandemic hit shortly thereafter. Like, we just won't know. And then the Biden administration, I think one of the real challenges for American business is the Biden administration was 4 years of extremely difficult regulatory policy. and an extremely activist, both DOJ and FTC, that really struck at the core of America's competitiveness and our ability to increase productivity. So the big problem is we've got to get productivity growing. I don't think we have the fiscal room to cut taxes from where they are today. And I think there's a real question about where do we need to raise taxes to start to put our house in order.
What's the answer to that?
It's going to come down to what the spending side looks like. So you've got, it's like any profit and loss statement. We've got a spending side, we have a revenue side, and the question is, what cuts are we willing to make on the spending side? But somebody's going to have to take out a piece of paper and a pencil, and just like every American household does, we're going to have to find a much closer to balancing the budget solution than what we've lived through over the last 4 years.
Citadel CEO Ken Griffin talking with Bloomberg's Sonali Basak a bit earlier today at the Economic Club of New York, and a fascinating back and forth that we wanted to bring you as part of our political coverage here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. If you're just joining us, welcome. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington with our signature panel standing by for their reaction to what we just heard and learned from Ken Griffin. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors, back together in hour 2 of Balance of Power. Rick, what's your thought on what we just heard from Ken Griffin, speaking for the market, at least in the case of our conversation here, and how much patience Wall Street is going to have for ballooning deficits, even if it means lower corporate and personal taxes?
Yeah, one thing I think, that he mentioned about the promises made on the campaign trail don't always translate into action in the administration. But in this case, one thing that was totally clear going into this administration was that Donald Trump was going to cut the size and scope of government, and he has given Elon Musk the task to do it. And so none of the other candidates were talking about reducing the size and role of the government. And that has real potential for spending cuts. Elon Musk has talked $2 trillion. I think that's exactly what Ken Griffin was talking about. If you take a pencil to the federal deficit, we spend $6.8 trillion a year as a federal government. If you can cut, anything out of that, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion, you're doing a lot to curtail these deficits that we've seen that seem to go endlessly. So I think that attack on the fiscal side of the budget is exactly what the federal government needs. And I think Elon Musk certainly knows something about cutting. And so I think this is one of those campaign promises that may come to fruition. We have no idea how wide or deep that will be, but at least it's a commitment to do it.
Yeah, I guess we'll see if it actually gets done, as it's one thing to advise, another for Congress to actually pull the purse strings. As we all know, Jeannie, Washington has its ways of working, and it's not necessarily the same as being the CEO of a company you are able to exercise control over. If we could, though, think about, as we think about not just the spending side of the ledger, but the revenue side as well, what's going to be happening with tax policy, with tariffs to implement or to offset tax cuts, as Donald Trump argues. A lot of this is going to be filtering through the Treasury Department. The fact that this is taking so long, and that our reporting here at Bloomberg suggests it's because no one is perfect for this role in the eyes of Donald Trump. They don't look the part and have the Wall Street pedigree, but necessarily agree with him on all of these policy issues. I wonder what that says to you. Is he going to be able to actually find a perfect candidate for not just this role, any of them?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in the context of the Treasury appointment, I think it's really, really difficult to find somebody, as you just mentioned, respected by Wall Street, who also shares his commitment to tariffs. What he describes as the most beautiful word in the world. So, finding somebody who meets both of those goals, very, very difficult. Lutnick, I guess, is now the tariff guy over in Commerce. He's changing things up a bit, but hard to do. And I would just say that, I thought that Ken Griffin had a really, really important statement in terms of how he approached the issue of immigration and the need to both preserve the talent, which is critical, and also secure the border. But I think in both that case and the case of the economy and inflation, this all depends on Congress working. And we haven't had a Congress that works for some time. Immigration has been broken and in crisis in this country for decades, and we haven't gotten a resolution. We, haven't even addressed the debt ceiling. We can't even pass budgets on time. So, the fact is he's absolutely right. We need these things. And, Rick's point about, whatever Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy decide to do, trying to cut $2 trillion, all of this depends on Washington, D.C. working, particularly Congress, and there's zero discussion about how to change it so that it actually happens. Even a unified Washington and Republicans now is unlikely to make that happen because they're so narrowly divided in terms of Republicans and Democrats. So that, to me, is the big, big challenge here.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go back live to Capitol Hill in just a few moments. Democratic Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois will be back with us on news of the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, resigning in January.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks higher, shaking off earlier losses. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all solidly in the green, spurred by swings in NVIDIA, as well as angst about the war in Ukraine. Bitcoin blew past 98,000. The dollar gained Bitcoin right now, trading at 98,210, up by 4%. Equity markets higher across the board, with the S&P up 36, 59.64 where we stand right now, up 0.6%. The Dow ripping higher, up 533, up 1.2%. NASDAQ up 27 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain now of 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 Index up 0.4%, and the Russell 2000 Index surging by 2%. 10-year 4.43%, the 2-year 4.34%. Gold up $20 the ounce to $26.70, up 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 69.79 a barrel, up 1.5%. And Bitcoin bears repeating another move higher, up 4% right now. Bitcoin 98,083. So again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher. S&P up 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellett. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellett, thank you, and great to have you with us on Bloomberg TV and radio, the Thursday edition of Balance of Power, live from Washington. It's been a pretty busy day around here with breaking news, and the more news breaks, the more questions we have. As we learned a little more than an hour ago, Matt Gaetz, former congressman from Florida, has withdrawn his name from nomination to be the next Attorney General. This was, of course, among the most controversial of Donald Trump's picks to fill out the cabinet. He resigned his House seat, as we told you, upon the announcement of that nomination last week. And so there's a concerted debate underway right now, Kaylee Lyons, about whether to release the Ethics Committee report, the investigation into Matt Gaetz' salacious allegations he has denied. And our next guest, who was with us just a couple of days ago, brought a privileged resolution to the floor of the House to bring a full House vote to potentially force the release of this ethics report. We could still see this, even though he is no longer in contention.
Yeah, and that's really what we want to get into now, as the clock has started on 2 legislative days, knowing that Congress is about to embark on a week-long recess for the Thanksgiving holiday. What's going to happen when we come back in early December? So let's turn now to Congressman Sean Casten, of course, the Democrat representing Illinois' 6th District, who put forward this privilege resolution, as Joe says, yesterday. Congressman, thanks for coming back to Balance of Power. If he is not going to be Attorney General, having withdrawn his name from consideration here, and if he is no longer going to be a member of the House of Representatives, why would this report need to come out if it's just a report looking into what would then be a private U.S. citizen?
Well, I'd put the question to you or viewers in any workplace. If you in your office knew that there was someone in the office who had serious allegations of sexual misconduct, including sex with a minor, and that person resigned from their office, would you be satisfied working in that workplace if they said, we're not going to continue this anymore? It doesn't matter what we know. That would be inexcusable in any other office. It was appropriate remember, the Ethics Committee was prepared to release this information in July. Because of the recess, they then punted that into a few weeks ago. They then punted again, and they now, based on their vote yesterday, on a straight party line basis, the Republicans on committee deadlocked with the Democrats and voted to punt again. This information should come out. We will continue to push in our office to make sure it comes out, because the allegations are serious, and it is in the good of the House, and it is in the good of making sure that the American people trust that the House holds itself to account, that we know what's in this report.
Your workplace analogy having been made, Congressman, I wonder if you're also concerned about Matt Gaetz serving in a different capacity in this White House, or maybe more so if he were to show up for the 119th Congress, to which he was elected, and actually take his seat back in January.
All those things are possibilities, and we can't predict the future. All we can do is to make sure that we make the right moral decision in the point we're in right now. And this one, to my mind, is fairly unambiguous.
Well, so as we consider the path forward here, we had understood the Ethics Committee was going to be meeting again on this matter on December 5th. The ranking Democratic member of that committee, Susan Wild, said so herself. There's been, Congressman, as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of chatter in the last week about whether or not this is going to come out either way, through formal means or otherwise. Would it be your hope, if the Ethics Committee can't find a way forward and your vote, your privilege resolution can't force this to happen, that this would leak out? Or if the formal institutions of the House have made it not so, should it indeed remain a secret if that is what your colleagues decide?
Well, I think there's a series of questions there, and let's unpack each of them. The Ethics Committee report is done. Notwithstanding what Mr. Guest has said, remember that they were prepared to vote on this in July. There was no discussion that the report wasn't done. So the Ethics Committee can make all of this go away by simply releasing the report that they were prepared to release in July. If the Ethics Committee is unable to do their ethical responsibility, then we can use the privileged resolution that we've introduced to compel the House to vote on that, provided that we have the votes on the floor. And it is tragic in the moment that we're in that we have to wonder whether the Republicans in the House will vote to condemn someone who's been accused of sexual misconduct. This is the moment we're in, and that's unfortunate. The third part of that, if those things don't happen, should it leak? I'm not going to take a position on that. I think it would be better for us to use formal procedures, but we should keep in mind how we got to this point. There are multiple women, it's our understanding, who have come forth and testified anonymously to the Ethics Committee with the understanding that they were providing reports to an Ethics Committee that would keep this in confidence. That takes tremendous courage, right? All of those women are well aware of what happened to Christine Blasey Ford when she came out during the Kavanaugh hearings, which was, of course, only the most recent time in memory that Donald Trump sent a candidate with allegations of sexual misconduct to the Senate for confirmation. How much her life was upended by being public. And if this information leaks out in dribs and drabs from other people, it makes it very hard to make sure that we protect those women and respect them. And the right way to do this, again, the way we minimize that is by the Ethics Committee doing their job. That would be my hope. But we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
We're spending time with Congressman Sean Caster. The Democrat is leading the charge here to force the public release of the Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz, who, if you're just joining us, has withdrawn his name from consideration, from nomination to be Attorney General. Does that withdrawal, Congressman, change the vote count to the extent that you had a sense of support for this resolution for when you come back from Thanksgiving? Does withdrawal of Matt Gaetz impact the outcome of your resolution?
I mean, obviously, this news has come so quickly. I've not had the time to talk with any of my Republican colleagues. I don't think it changes the calculus for any of my Democratic colleagues.
Did you have the votes before?
You know, there were certainly Republicans that were I think one came out publicly. Derek Van Orden came out and said that he would support releasing the information. There are other privately who look. This is not betraying any confidences. There are a lot of Republicans who don't particularly care for Matt Gaetz. If this is purely about a personal question, I think that's an open question. I think it's an easy question. I think the separate question of, are there Republicans in the House who are prepared to take actions that would be oppositional to Donald Trump's desire, even if Donald Trump's desire is to nominate someone who is alleged to have committed sexual misconduct? Would they stand up to that? I don't know. But to the extent that there's a tension between those points, then one, I suppose, could speculate that it would be politically easier for Republicans in the House to vote based on their feelings for Matt Gaetz rather than based on their fear of Donald Trump.
Well, Congressman, we appreciate you joining us on this and look forward to seeing the outcome here of this privilege resolution as we deal with this one piece of breaking news. But we've gotten some other breaking news within the last hour as well. I would love you to weigh in on, as a member of the House Financial Services Committee, the chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, has said now officially he will be resigning on January 20th. For many, this will not be surprising. Donald Trump had promised to fire him anyway, but considering your role on the Financial Services Committee, the idea that the SEC could be critical in these next 4 years in forming the path forward for industries, including the crypto industry, what is your hope here on who will be selected to replace him? What kind of person that will be?
So first, I just have tremendous respect for Chair Gensler. I think he's has certainly done a lot of work, as you all know, during his tenure, and I think has been a very loud advocate for investor protection. There is always a tension, a healthy tension, within the SEC between how far do you go towards investor protection and how far do you go towards maximizing access to capital markets. Everything you push in one direction hurts the other, and vice versa. I would like to see anybody at the SEC who understands that balance and who frankly skews more to the investor protection side, because I've always felt that part of public service or any position of power is to make sure that you're advocating for the people who aren't in the room as much as you are for the people who are. And the work that Gensler has done to look out for the less sophisticated participants in our financial markets, I think has been important. We'll see what happens on the Trump side, but I do fear that this is not an administration that has shown nearly as much commitment to investor protection as I would like.
Well, on the market side, it's a celebration. Certainly in the crypto market, we're getting closer to $100,000 for Bitcoin, Congressman. I know you're not necessarily guided by the markets on this, but what does that tell you potentially about the person who may replace Gary Gensler?
Well, look, there is a huge problem and has been a huge problem in the crypto sector for a long time, that the structure of those crypto exchanges and markets, the use of anonymous wallets, the use of mixers, the use of cross-chain bridges, it is very easy to cover your tracks and has been very attractive as a result to folks who want to launder money, want to get around know your customer rules, want to get around FinCEN, and has also been attractive to a lot of people who want to take advantage of less sophisticated players. To be clear, that's not saying that one cannot imagine a legal use case for crypto. But a lot of what the crypto industry has not liked about Mr. Gensler is that he has been pushing for a disclosure-based regulatory environment that says if you're going to buy and sell something of value, you need to have the same types of protections, whatever that is. And we can quibble about, is this the Howey test and all those sorts of issues, but the crypto industry has clearly been pushing for a long time to move themselves out of a disclosure-based regulatory regime at the SEC and into a purely market exchange-based regulatory structure at the CFTC.
Yeah.
And one can't assume that the advocacy for that move accrues to the benefit of investors who depend on those disclosures.
Congressman, we just have a minute left here, but obviously the current chairman of the Financial Services Committee will see his time in Congress come to an end at the end of this session. Is there someone you think would best work with Democrats on a bipartisan basis as the next chair of the Financial Services Committee? Is there a candidate you favor for that role?
In general, I think the Financial Services Committee has done in general a very good job of avoiding some of the more rancorous, vitriolic debates on some of the other committees. I would say that virtually all of the Democrats on the committee have a very good working relationship with Fran Schill. A lot of us have a good relationship with Andy Barr. A lot of us have a very good relationship with Frank Lucas. And we will certainly have our disagreements on policy issues, and some of those, of course, will be animated. But I think all three of those candidates are candidates who have a respect for the institution and a respect for the work of the committee, which is important.
Congressman, it's good to have you back. Let's meet up after Thanksgiving and see how this vote goes. Sean Casten, we appreciate all of your time this week. The congressman from Illinois' 6th Democratic voice here on the news that Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration as Attorney General. This is happening, Kaylee Lyons, as Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump's nominee for a defense secretary makes his way through the halls of power on Capitol Hill today, meeting with senators who will likely decide his fate, assuming he gets to confirmation hearings.
Yeah, and we'll see how much additional scrutiny is placed on him now that the spotlight has moved off of Matt Gaetz, having withdrawn his nomination. We'll continue to follow these stories and everything else that could still happen this afternoon in Washington here on Balance of Power. We'll see you again at 5 p.m. on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Hi, I'm Laurie Haynes, CEO and co-founder of Shirar, and I'm really excited to tell you that we are going to be raising funds for Shirar again. After a successful raise in 2023, it's time to scale.
We hope that you enjoy the pitch deck and the financial model. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us, and we can't wait for you to be part of Shirar.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Again, coming to the studio to talk about Bitcoin.
He might actually be in the studio right now.
Oh, I think he may be, not just virtually, he's literally here. Bitcoin nearing $100,000. I remember covering this asset at $75. We're going to talk to, I'm really excited to get Mandeep Singh in here to expand on NVIDIA and potential competitors. He and Anurag Rana set up an amazing AI conference yesterday.
That was a lot of fun.
It was more fun than expected, don't you think?
I had a great time.
And then, as you mentioned, Shonali Basak is going to come back in here. She was at the Economic Club of New York interviewing Ken Griffin, and she's going to tell us what he had to say.
Yeah, a lot to look forward to. Should we talk to Charlie Pellet first, though?
Let's get over to Charlie Pellet right now.
Here's what's going on. We got a lot of moving parts in this U.S. stock market on this Thursday here. Lots going on with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P, NASDAQ 100 Index, Russell 2000, all ripping higher. We were talking about NVIDIA. This is a stock that at one point was down 0.8%, up now by just about 1%. S&P 500 Index pushing higher. The S&P now up by 0.7%, up 39. The Dow up 525 points, up 1.2%. NASDAQ up 49, up 0.3%. Perhaps the big story among small caps with the Russell 2000 surging by 2%. 10-year 4.42%. The 2-year 4.33%. Spot gold up 0.8%. 26.72 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%. 69.86 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin, what a story there, taking out 98,377 right now, up 4.1%. Our Mike Regan's going to have a whole lot more on the Bitcoin story coming up in just a moment. NVIDIA, we got you covered. It is assuring investors that its new product lineup can maintain the company's AI-fueled growth run. NVIDIA shares, again after earlier losses, up now by 1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Let's talk about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's above $98,000 a coin right now, up 4% on the day. And in the last hour or so, Gary Gensler, Bitcoin foe, crypto foe, he's going to retire on or step down on January 20th.
Good riddance. A lot of people in the crypto community will be saying, and also blowout quarter for Bitcoin.
Oh boy.
I mean, earnings way beyond expectations. They're going to do a big buyback.
Yeah,
the fundamentals are strong.
Future expected cash flows are just off the charts here. Mike Regan, what's going on? Are we going to hit 100K? Is it going to happen like while you're giving this hit?
I sensed a little mockery in that.
No.
That Matt Miller intro there, yeah. The fundamentals. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think Bitcoin has these resistance levels at these round numbers, so it wouldn't surprise me if it tortures us for a few days here staring at the screen before I can send that red headline about it reaching 100,000.
You've got your finger over it right now.
I know. I'm hovering. My eyes are going cross-eyed staring at the numbers. But, I think the general consensus is that 100,000 and even higher is sort of inevitable because when you think about some of the promises that Trump made on the campaign trail to the crypto world, you couldn't make up a more bullish scenario than, for one thing, Gary Gensler deciding to step down on Inauguration Day. That's one part of it. But the big, I think, elephant in the room is Trump has promised to create a national strategic Bitcoin stockpile. So something along the lines of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We've had strategic reserves for grains and stuff like cheese in the past. Mm-hmm. They're thinking that a Bitcoin reserve is needed now. The big question is the government owns something like 208,000 Bitcoin already, and Trump's plan,
which is surprising. I feel like most people don't know that.
Yeah, from
just
various
confiscations or what?
Yeah, various criminal cases, confiscations, asset seizures, and typically that's all given back to the victims of these cases. But Trump's plan is for the government to hodl it, as they say in the crypto world. But his ally in the Senate, Cynthia Loomis of the Wyoming Republican senator, she wants to go even further and have the government sell off a bunch of the gold that the Federal Reserve holds, actually gold certificates, but
physical Bitcoin.
Representing gold, yes, the old-fashioned store value of Bitcoin. Now, I think it's an open question whether that will happen, but her plan is for the government to buy up to 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years. So you're talking about buying 5% of outstanding Bitcoin, 250,000 Bitcoin a year. That's more than what is being created in the mining process. So
it's more than Satoshi owns.
Yeah, it's right about near what Satoshi owns and what the ETFs own now. So these huge whales are really taking over. So I think there is some event risk there as far as if she can't get that bill through Congress. So we'll have to see. But in the meantime, there's a couple months here until Trump's inaugurated, till the new Congress is seated, so we get a sense of really where on his priority list all this stuff is and whether he really does endorse that idea of selling gold and to buy Bitcoin. To be honest, Trump likes gold as well,
Well, remember also we were talking to Michael Novogratz, I think it was last week, and we asked him about that Bitcoin reserve, and he didn't think it was very likely that it was going to happen.
Yeah, I think he's been burned by bullishness in the past.
He still has that tattoo.
Yes.
of
So,
Luna.
I mean, I'm sure that he's excited to have that in his back pocket, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, before we get to Caroline Hyde, she of Bloomberg Technology, and get her take on Bitcoin as well, as they cover that, as well as NVIDIA. What is it like for you as a journalist, going from, you were leading basically our stocks and markets coverage at the head of Markets Live, and a lot of assets you were covering that actually had fundamentals.
Yeah.
And now you're leading our coverage of Bitcoin. What's that shift like for you as a journalist?
I often refer to it as the day I joined the circus, and hopped in the clown car, I guess, just because, I mean, obviously this asset class, whatever you think about it fundamentally or where it's going, there's just so many crazy stories involved, so many colorful characters, so many crimes and hacks and malfunctions in the crypto space that it's a fascinating story to cover, obviously. So as a journalist, I love it.
Talking about characters, can we talk about Michael Saylor?
Yeah.
That man owns, his company, which is nominally a software company, owns so much Bitcoin. You think about the supply-demand dynamics, the fact that, okay, maybe we'll get a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. Also, we know that MicroStrategy is going to try to buy up all the Bitcoin.
That's his company, right? MicroStrategy?
Yeah. Will ever exist. That has to be part of the bullish thesis.
It absolutely is, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's not just the optimism about Trump. I mean, here Saylor and MicroStrategy have come out and said they were going to tap capital markets, sell shares, sell convertible debt to the tune of $42 billion worth, just to pump it all back into Bitcoin. And there's this whole, as you know, Katie, there's these levered ETFs that
I've heard about them.
Yeah, they try to even do better, 2 times the performance of MicroStrategy. So it absolutely is certainly a part of this price action we've seen, I think, is they're in the market, all the time, just buying up Bitcoin, price insensitive.
Yeah.
They raise the money in the capital markets and they go and buy Bitcoin, and here we are.
People keep trying to short MicroStrategy, which is really interesting.
Like Citron, like Andrew left Citron Research?
Yeah, exactly. It's as a hedge to their long Bitcoin position. We saw Carousel Capital try this in March or something.
Yeah, well, the thinking is if you look at the market cap of MicroStrategy compared to the market value of the Bitcoin it holds, I mean, it's a huge disconnect. The market cap of the company is, I think it's like 3 times the value of the Bitcoin. And the regular software business is kind of dwindled down to not much of a business at all. So it's really, you know, their business strategy is to buy Bitcoin, and it's trading at this huge premium to the value of the Bitcoin they hold. So again, back to those fundamental investors, you know, you still think there is some fundamental analysis left in the stock market, and investors like Left and Citron, they see this disconnect and think it's got to resolve itself. But you know, we're living in the age of the meme stock where these fundamentals, they don't matter anymore. If enough people are interested in buying it and it keeps going up, you know, it's hard to really time when that sort of relationship would go back to normal and MicroStrategy start trading at a multiple that's more realistic compared to how much Bitcoin it owns.
Let's bring in Caroline Hyde here, co-anchor of Bloomberg Technology, and she's with us in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. So Caroline, we want to talk to you about NVIDIA, but I thought, why don't we get you in on this Bitcoin conversation as well, as you must occasionally talk about it
time to time
on your program.
It's way into the technology show.
I mean, it's like such a boring, old school digital asset, and you can't really do anything with Bitcoin except for sit on it. You can't even spend it, right? I asked Michael Saylor once when we had him on Bloomberg Open Interest about spending it, and he said that's ridiculous. It's
Why
like
would
if
you
your
do that?
grandparents give you a building in New York City, you don't sell it, right? I think that was literally his reply. And my grandparents have never given me a building.
Well, therein lies someone who lives in a developed nation where the FX works pretty well, then you're not too dependent on an ever-eroding value of your currency. I'm sure there is some remittance going on somewhere with Bitcoin and crypto.
What's your take on the $100,000 target? I'm sure that you've had people on who give you their sort of pie-in-the-sky forecast for where Bitcoin's going to go, and for a lot of them, we're there now.
And it's psychological, the $100,000 level. But for everyone that's on 100,000, I've read that, we're going to the moon, $1 million. You know, some of those are more realistic than others. I think that we've had some great people come. I mean, Jack Mallers joining the show yesterday. He's at Strike. He owns and runs what, it's a trading platform for Bitcoin. He's a Bitcoin OG. He particularly only wants to be making markets. He's saying 90% of the people, he had a record day on the day of election. People poured in, bought Bitcoin, and 90% of them apparently are taking it off and putting it in cold storage. So they're generally buying to hold rather than to be trading it at this moment. But yeah, 100,000, I feel many are saying it's going to be a relatively tempestuous line up to 100,000, and once we get there, who knows? But I think, is it Mike Novogratz, with old Lunar Tattoo, as you mentioned, has been saying 100,000 by the end of the year, and we're just front running that.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe he'll get that target fulfilled in just a couple of minutes, or at least a couple of days. I was wondering how we were going to make the bridge from crypto into NVIDIA.
Well, NVIDIA used to all be about crypto.
Exactly. You think about NVIDIA, it's been around for so long. It's a mature, established company, and its chips used to be like the go-to for crypto mining operations.
Yeah, and gaming is ultimately where it made its start, and then it pivoted hard into AI accelerators. And now you have Jensen Huang trying to tell us the future of AI robotics and the fact that eventually generative AI will start healing us, will start making our lives more efficient. But for the here and now, it's all about the infrastructure play, how we're going to put in place the AI accelerators that keep getting rather hot if you're using them in certain capacities.
I've heard that's a problem.
Too hot to handle. But there's a lot of innovation that goes in and around ensuring that they don't get too hot. And look, they've been saying that the cooling situation has been handled. And I think actually Jensen Huang did a decent job at saying, look, hold your horses. We're getting this supply out there. It's going to come on tap. It's going at great guns in the end of 2025 fiscal year. Next year is when it really takes off. So again, this is a supply issue rather than a demand issue. And he's also been saying how compute power and scaling laws remain intact. I think we've been questioning that a little bit. Rachel Metz over in San Francisco doing some great work just showing how difficult it is, for example, for OpenAI to let out the next iteration of its generative AI large language model, because it's getting ever harder to get improvements. People then questioned, well, is it just the amount of data and the amount of compute power, we're not going to get the same results out? Jensen Huang's sort of trying to say, look, these scaling laws still stand. It's just a more nuanced job now.
It's amazingly expensive to buy NVIDIA chips and racks. No, but number one, a chipset costs as much as the average car, right? So you're looking at about 40 grand for the chipset. But if you buy enough to fit into a rack, you're talking about millions. And then you've also got to reinforce the floor of your data center, because those data centers are usually designed to hold about 1,000 pounds in the space that a NVIDIA rack sits on, and they weigh 3,000 pounds.
Did you get this from the panel yesterday?
From many different panels I was listening to. And then you've also got to hire plumbers to come in and run liquid cooling through each of the racks.
Quite specific plumbers, you just can't find them everywhere.
Well, have you tried finding a plumber lately? I mean, even up where you live, out in the country, it's probably difficult. And
yeah, well, I've lost them all to data centers.
there you go. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
But look, did you see the XAI raise once again and the valuation? That Elon Musk is the guy who's been plowing yet more money into compute power from NVIDIA. But what's so interesting is this is where we're worried, right? Is NVIDIA's demand is a little bit too niche. People are concerned that ultimately, yes, you got XAI in there and some heavily VC-backed names, but generally you're depending on about 4 or 5 of the Magnificent Seven to keep plowing money into NVIDIA. And when is that going to expand a little bit? Interesting, we had a guest on who was really saying that you're seeing healthcare and hospitals in particular starting to be a real area of growth for the likes of Jensen. But that's why, of course, he talks of sovereign AI as well, and countries being the demand.
Exactly, because it costs so much to build a large language model that and yesterday I did learn the difference between training and inference.
Yeah,
so
he broke that out on the 9 a.m.
So, I mean, apparently NVIDIA's chips are very important for training models.
So much compute, yeah.
But we're not going to train our own model at my company. You're not going to train your own model at your company. You're going to use a model
Bloomberg actually is training its own model.
No, I meant like at my fictional company, like at Katie Greifeld Dressage Inc., right? They don't need to train their own model. They've just got,
she
one
needs to be
barn
a great
to
jumper,
operate.
and I'm sure that there's data that is going to make her
But
the
they'll
best show
use
jumper.
Llama, right? So they just need to do the inference part. There's only going to be like 10 or 12 or maybe 20 companies that are doing training.
And then there's a load of startups who are coming in to try and say, look, we are a more energy efficient, more capital efficient use of compute. We had one on the show a little bit earlier, Supernova, and they're really thinking about how they can offer a different type of technology to GPU to instead have a more energy efficient way of inferring.
Wait, you had them, Samba Nova?
Yeah, were you speaking to them yesterday? I think they were at the Gen
yeah.
AI event, and then he came on the show.
Yeah, that's where I got most of my intel. By the way, did
good old Rodrigo
Mike Regan just peace out?
Yeah, he's got to go. Like, Bitcoin's about to hit.
Yeah, but he just up and left the Bloomberg Business Week studio in the middle of a conversation. I was going to fold him into this.
He did ask me with his eyes, "Can I leave?" And I said yes. So he got the blessing.
We didn't even goodnight him.
Yeah, well, okay. So Mike Regan, who covers Bitcoin for us, he was with us. Now he's not. And
thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike Regan. Caroline Hyde, I'm sure you've had.
Do I ask to leave?
If you want to leave, you can. We have about a minute left in the segment, and it's just wild. I mean, we were talking about this with you when you were on Open Interest yesterday about how this has turned into a macro event, and that was kind of a joke, but it's kind of not a joke. I mean, the size of this company is incredible.
But can I just weave these two things together? What always blows my mind, I wonder how much airtime we give crypto vis-a-vis NVIDIA. Crypto is a third of the market cap of NVIDIA. The entire crypto ecosystem is worth about
Bitcoin and the dog coins and Ethereum, etc.
Yeah, and then you're like, and then meanwhile we're going to have potentially the first ever White House crypto post. Should there just be Jensen? Should we just have an NVIDIA?
Maybe
White House post.
I don't know. I was thinking
because
maybe
there's a market impactful.
Maybe Jensen could be Fed chair. I don't know. There's a lot we can work on here.
I want them to bring Roger Ver back
I don't know who
from
that is.
Spain. He's Bitcoin Jesus.
He's got a few legal issues.
He's fighting extradition, but he can be pardoned. Caroline Hyde from Bloomberg Tech, thank you so much for joining us. Katie and I will be back in just 1 minute. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got NASDAQ back in the red after earlier gains, down now by 7, lower little change. Dow Industrials up 513, up 1.2%, while the S&P higher by 32 points, now up by 0.5%. Stocks higher, shaking off early losses spurred by swings in NVIDIA, as well as angst about the war in Ukraine. Russell 2000 up now by 1.8%. 10-year 4.42%, the 2-year 4.33%. Gold up $20 the ounce, up 0.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude 70.04 a barrel. Bitcoin, major story today, surging another 4.7%. 98,850 right now on Bitcoin. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much, Charlie Pellet there with your Business Flash. Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio, along with Katie Greifeld, and we co-anchor a show together on Bloomberg TV in the morning.
Yeah, this is hour 13 here at Bloomberg HQ. Open interest, 9 to 11 a.m. daily. We're doing open interest part 2 right now. Theoretically, this is Bloomberg Business Week, but it's fun, you know.
I like to do this because I can plug our show. You should definitely watch us on Bloomberg Open Interest, weekdays 9 to 11. Let's get to Mandeep Singh right now. He is at another conference after putting one on yesterday, so he's going big on conferences, and he's going to explain to us what Snowflake does. Mandeep?
Well, I think the easiest way to think about it is it's a data warehousing platform where all the analytics can be run, and now they have another layer on top of it where you can create chatbots or AI agents through the Snowflake layer because it houses all the data. And last night, what they told us is they are integrating the different LLMs, whether it's Anthropic or Meta Llama. And I think that was music to investors, which is why you saw that stock reaction.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, shares are up by more than 30% right now. They were up even higher earlier today. This is their biggest jump since September 2020. And boy, Mandeep, did this stock need it, because even with this insane move that we're seeing today, shares are still down 14% year to date. So is what we learned actually an inflection point for this stock compared to all the other issues that they're still dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, look at the guide that they have raised. It was almost 300 basis points for the full year this year, and even going into next year. Snowflake was a company that was growing, north of 30%. So they saw a sharp deceleration because everyone thought they are getting disintermediated when it comes to AI. And I think what they have found is that right pivot. So I do expect that top line growth to sustain going forward.
Who are the biggest competitors, Mandeep, when you look at a company, any stock that's soaring by 25 or 30%? I want to know, what are my other choices in this market?
Yeah, I mean, the risk of disintermediation comes from the hyperscalers, because the way Microsoft is going into the market, they're saying we have the foundational model, we'll give you the analytics layer, and you can create all agents. But the problem they have is enterprise data is across clouds, and Snowflake grows basically as data from different clouds into one platform. And I think that is the value proposition that Snowflake has, which Microsoft cannot have, because obviously it's all vertical integration for Microsoft. And then there are other pure plays like Databricks, which was at our conference yesterday. But then there are very few companies that, compete with Snowflake in that domain.
So Snowflake obviously having an amazing day today. It's been a really rough ride since about February, March or so of this year. The market cap is $57 billion, which obviously is not nothing. But do you think that this is a company that, might be thinking about M&A in terms of them buying something or them actually being acquired, Mandeep?
Yeah, I mean, last night they did announce a tuck-in acquisition. I think anything north of, $2-3 billion is very hard to convince investors that you will see, cost synergies and revenue synergies right off the gate. So I do think they will stick with tuck-ins, which they did one of those last night. And all they need to do is to add more LLM capabilities. That was the part that worried investors. So other than that, this company has a long runway. It's got a very sticky business model. I mean, data has a lot of gravity. Once you get the data on your platform, companies don't really take out that data very quickly. So I do think it's a very sticky business.
Mandeep, while we have you here, I want to get your take on NVIDIA. Obviously, everybody was watching this company come out with earnings yesterday.
Yeah.
And, you know, previously they would, the shares would soar, valuing the company at like 70 times earnings, but then they would just raise their forecasts and that valuation would come crashing down to earth. Yesterday, there was no raise. In fact, their fourth quarter forecast was bang in the middle of the street's range. It was kind of a bummer. And the shares, they've been bouncing back and forth between gains and losses today. What's your take?
I mean, the stock would have been down a lot more had they not said, you know, they still see $1 trillion opportunity in the data center and without any capex digestion. So that was the key. You know, they don't expect any significant capex digestion from the hyperscalers. And look, you know, a lot of things could go wrong if you really start nitpicking, whether it's on the China side or tariffs raising their costs. But in the end, they're still growing, you know, way faster than everyone else in the semi space. So I think that's where the market share continues to be with them. It's just a question of whether the hyperscalers will all be with them or one of them will say, okay, now Google may say, we have our own chips and we don't need to use NVIDIA. I don't think we are close to that moment yet, but that's a big risk factor with NVIDIA.
All right, Mandeep, really appreciate you taking the time for us. I'll let you get back to that conference now. That is Bloomberg intelligence analyst Mandeep Singh. You take a look at NVIDIA shares right now, currently higher by about 0.8%, not exactly the 8% move that the options market was bracing for.
Yeah, exactly. Where were the fireworks? I thought it was either up or down 8% or 9%, erasing or adding $300 billion of market cap, and just didn't really
This was supposed to be more important than the Fed, but
well, it still is that.
Yeah, perhaps. More important than inflation data, too. At least according to Bank of America and to Barclays. We'll continue to keep an eye on NVIDIA. But let's get to one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal right now. A scoop coming out of our team that hedge fund 2 Sigma cuts 200 staff after strategic review. Let's bring in now Bloomberg's hedge fund reporter, Hema Parmar. And this is an interesting one, Hema. As you report, this is the first public sweeping change by the new co-CEOs.
Precisely. The two new co-CEOs joined a few months ago. And keep in mind, they came into the company to replace the founders that were leaving because the feud between the 2 billionaire founders had gotten so fraught with tension that they had to step down. And so we have two new people leading the charge here. And one of, their first big public change is to dismiss about 200 people at the firm. That's about 10% of 2 Sigma staff in total.
I mean, obviously this sucks for the people who got the axe, right? But it makes total sense to me that when new leaders come in, they take a look at the asset and decide, you know, if it's a little too bloated, maybe we take out some headcount. And in fact, they had a great model to follow in Brevin Howard.
Yeah, so you do see people really streamlining the firm. A lot of the cuts at 2 Sigma were more in the back office or operational side of things versus portfolio management. But this was part of a strategic review. So yes, really going through and seeing where they could kind of trim the fat. Brevin Howard cut about 10% of its staff this year. This is a fund that's actually doing really well now. They had a really killer month on the back of the election, making some good trades post-election with the Trump win. And it spelled about $700 million in profits for them recently. So it's good bet for them.
To that point, I mean, how is 2 Sigma doing? Obviously, they've had a lot of internal turmoil, their billionaire founders feuding in public, now having to cut 200 staff. I mean, what does performance actually look like, though?
So performance is actually pretty good. This is a hedge fund that, because it's a quant firm, essentially, it's less run by one person like a fundamental equity manager would be. This is a firm that's really run by teams of people, quite institutional. So its biggest fund is up about 11.2% this year. That's the absolute return enhanced fund. It's their biggest fund when it comes to assets. That's not bad. And their assets under management are at a peak about $65 billion. You really haven't seen redemptions, and you haven't seen a big drawdown in some of their performance.
Can I just say,
yeah,
11%. It's not that bad, but it certainly doesn't seem that good when you have the S&P 500 up 24% so far this year.
A lot of hedge funds don't beat the S&P.
Yeah.
Hedge funds are supposed to be used, many would say, to diversify from equity exposure, to provide a hedge against a market downfall. So a lot of them, if you look across the board, don't beat the stock market.
Which is fine if they don't, as long as they don't lose as much as the S&P does on a down year, right?
Precisely. They should not be losing as much. And when you do see them losing as much, what's the point, frankly? They should be doing well or not losing as much. When
if you want alpha, buy Vital Farms.
That's true. Buy the egg maker. That Vital Farms up, what, like
86% year to date?
Just amazing. I will say it's pretty rare that the S&P 500 has a down year. We had a big owie in 2022, down 19%, but even still, I get it. I get the diversification pitch, but do you really need it? In any case, so like you said and you reported, this is the first public sweeping change. Talk to us and bring us into the feud between the founders, though, because that was amazing. We saw it in public filings. I have to imagine that as a reporter, that was pretty fun, pretty interesting to cover.
So fascinating. You really don't see things like this happen very, very often. These two, they started the firm more than 20 years ago. Something happened over the past 20 years where what started out as maybe spats, small disagreements, really snowballed and grew such that they really couldn't be in the same room together. It began to impact staff retention. It began to impact how people under them could really work and how efficiently people could do their jobs. So much so, it became a material risk that in their ADV, which is their regulatory filing, the firm had to disclose that the two billionaires are in such disagreement that it might be a material risk to investors. We've never seen that before, and certainly not at a firm as secretive as Two Sigma. These are firms that are really concerned about giving away their secrets and really generally don't like to be out there very much.
Well, and the lesson is, there can only be one boss.
Well, they didn't learn that lesson.
Oops.
And they still have two bosses. So.
Yeah, why would they? I mean, how do you not learn that lesson? It's almost never a good idea to have co-CEOs. It's like cats in a bag.
And what's interesting is at least before the first two co-CEOs were quant guys, these two new co-CEOs, they're not quants. One is general counsel of Lazard. The other is really tenured at the firm, but in business. So you are seeing a quant shop really not being run by quants, which could be an interesting evolution or could be the way to try to fix a firm that wasn't really working. But it's also a bit unique when we look at that strategy.
You know, some companies like that cats in a bag management style.
Yeah, I have heard.
Popularly employed. Hema, great scoop, great reporting, as always. That, of course, is Bloomberg News hedge fund reporter Hema Parmar. Meanwhile, we take a look at these markets right now. The S&P 500 up about 0.7%, less than 90 minutes to go until the closing bells. Looks like we'll end at a positive note, but we're still not back at 6,000, Matt Miller.
No, and I will say that we briefly climbed over 99,000 on Bitcoin, but we haven't gotten too much closer to 100,000 right now, trading at 98,520. That's an asset that I don't normally keep up on my screen, but I'm watching it very closely as we get to this big round number. We're going to come back with more hedge fund news for you from Ken Griffin. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got NASDAQ back in the green right now, looking at an advance of 39 points. NASDAQ up 0.2%. S&P by comparison up 40 right now at 59.67. Higher by 0.7%. Dow Industrials up 548 points now, up 1.3%. The Russell 2000 index up by 2%. Stocks higher, shaking off earlier losses spurred by swings in NVIDIA, as well as angst about the war in Ukraine. Bitcoin blowing past $98,000. Right now we've got Bitcoin 98,428. Bitcoin surging by 4.2%. 10-year at 4.43%. The 2-year 4.34%. Gold up $18 the ounce to $26.69, up 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude back above 70.13 a barrel, up today by 2%. NVIDIA up 1.4%. It is assuring investors that its new product lineup can maintain the company's AI-fueled growth run. After earnings, Snowflake shares are surging up 32%. The company gave a better-than-expected sales outlook, suggesting newly launched products are getting a strong reception from customers. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much. Matt Miller here with Katie Greifeld in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. And, we're filling in for Carol and Tim. Our day job, we anchor a show on Bloomberg Television. It's called Open Interest every weekday from 9 to 11. And
it's quite good.
And we do that with Shonali Bassick. Well, guess what? She's joined us here as well. Fresh out of the Economic Club of New York, Shonali, where you knocked it out of the park in an interview with Ken Griffin.
I gotta say, I really missed you guys, though, the hour that we were apart.
We should have come. We really should have come with
I
you.
know, you guys were holding on the fourth here.
As we discussed.
But you got a lot of news out of him. I thought the most interesting, I know that the market side is going to say they want to hear more about the potential for him to sell a minority stake, and he's not close to an IPO. But for me, the political comments were the juiciest, right? Because he said Trump's policies could lead to crony capitalism, which is very bad in the long term.
I was going to ask him that as a standalone because, when you think about how many people have made it their way to office, right? Either in the cabinet or around the cabinet, it's a lot of people who are also donors. And we have talked about this before. It's not like money and politics have not become closer and closer together anyways in both parties. But in this instance, it seems pretty stark, doesn't it? And he seems to think so too. This is also, by the way, coming from someone who has donated more than $100 million to down ballot races himself. So that's kind of why I was most interested to hear why he's so concerned about crony capitalism, because the connection between money and power has gotten closer no matter what. So at the end of the day, when is that connection way too close?
Well, shall we hear from the man himself? We have some tape, don't we?
We do.
Let's listen in.
I am gravely concerned that the rise of tariffs puts us on a slippery slope towards cronyism capital. So when you implement tariffs for the American companies that produce goods in America, there's unquestionably a short-term benefit. You've just taken your competitors and severely disadvantaged them. The challenge with this, and we know this from the history of economics, those same companies that enjoy that momentary sugar rush of having their competitors removed from the battlefield soon become complacent, soon take for granted their newfound economic superiority, and frankly, they become less competitive on both the world stage and less competitive at meeting the needs of the American consumer. And then, of course, once you're in this world where companies know that their very existence is because of tariffs, so the tariffs came down, they wouldn't be able to compete, they wouldn't be able to thrive. Now you're going to find the halls of Washington really filled with the special interest groups and the lobbyists as people look for continued higher and higher tariffs to keep away foreign competition and to protect inefficient American businesses that fail to meet the needs of the American consumer.
Are you concerned here that some companies, some industries will be benefiting at the expense of others, even in this country?
Well, of course, that's true, right? Those companies that bring in goods from around the world will be disadvantaged out of the gate. Those companies with a very large domestic production base will be advantaged out of the gate. I'm not so worried about I should be more worried about it, to be blunt. I haven't given much thought to sort of the internal equity as between these parties in the United States. I'm much more concerned that this is the beginning of a slippery slope towards economic both irrelevance and going back to the earliest point, a decline in productivity, a decline in the very important need that we have to increase American productivity.
All right, that was Ken Griffin speaking with Sonali Bask at the Economic Club of New York. I kind of wanted just to keep listening to that. So where can we hear it, by the way? The whole thing. Do we have to go on the ECNY website?
Yeah,
is it
that
on
will be
Bloomberg.com or?
Well,
I think you can
definitely
go
be playing
on Live Go too and like scroll back if you're on the Bloomberg terminal. But
Cool. That's very cool. All right.
Until then,
let's get to the other issues that the other pieces of news that he broke with you. One was something I hadn't even thought about, is the fact that he could sell a stake in Citadel. Now, do we need to differentiate between the businesses that he runs? One's a hedge fund and one is a market maker?
Right. So there's a hedge fund, Citadel. Citadel, the hedge fund firm, is a standalone, but then Citadel Securities, the market-making firm, where he is not an executive but has a significant stake, they sold a stake to investors, including Sequoia, which is known as a very prominent venture capital firm. So when that happened, there were a lot of rumors around whether it would go public or not. But Citadel, the hedge fund firm, the reason we asked this is because there's a whole other thing going on in the market where Millennium, their biggest rival, is in talks, according to Bloomberg and other news sources, that they're in talks to sell a stake to BlackRock. And so the whole idea, we've talked about it on our show, as you've been talking about, that this is the idea of succession. It's institutionalizing these firms. They have just gotten so giant. And so a lot of people are wondering, A, what happens as they grow, and B, what happens if he one day steps aside. We asked him about his own political ambitions. He didn't get too specific. I think I've asked Ken Griffin if he wants to be Treasury Secretary every time I've interviewed him.
He's not old, right?
So,
I think he's only like 58 or something.
Yeah, he's in his mid to late 50s, and so he's got time on his hands.
He is, yeah. It's wide open field there. Of course, we weren't even talking about him this cycle because he very much did not support Donald Trump. He's donated, of course, to other Republican races, but, you know, what was it, at the Columbia Night Badget, he talked about how he was excited for 2028 and isn't supporting either candidate.
That's absolutely
He's only 56.
You know who he did sort of support, though? I was surprised because I didn't even quite go there in my line of questioning yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to drive both of you crazy. We talked about the Treasury Secretary.
Oh, come on, Sonali.
Oh, we're so tired of talking about it, but I was asking him about Mark Rowan, who's the CEO of Apollo, and other financial theories that he had, and I said, well, you know, of course, Mark is somebody who's being discussed as a potential Treasury Secretary, and he said, please, Mark, please accept the job. So a lot of people who didn't support Trump, Stan Druckenmiller being another one, for example, are saying that there's certain people that are making financial policy, economic policy, that they do very much support. So even without that support for Trump himself, there are certain doses of support, let's say, for other people that he could have around him. I'm sure you guys saw that Gary Gensler might be stepping down.
He is stepping down January 20th. I was actually hoping and praying that we would get the Treasury Secretary announcement between 2 to 3 p.m. today so that Matt and I would have to break it. I think that would have been good karma.
I don't know. I feel like we talk about it so much that we missed the real story, and that is Matt Gaetz
oh my goodness.
Getting no confirmation and having to withdraw.
I was so bummed. That happened while I was on stage with him, and I couldn't ask because I didn't know. I didn't have my phone on me. Bummer.
I wonder what he would have said, though. I don't know.
In terms of the other news, and we only have about 20 seconds left that you got out of Ken Griffin, he said no IPO anytime soon, right? That's for Citadel Securities.
Right. No IPO anytime soon for Citadel Securities, but maybe a stake sale for Citadel. That was a big deal because people didn't really think that you could get a piece of Citadel, the hedge fund, moving forward. But if he's open to it, then it draws up a whole new set of ideas in the world of finance for what kind of pairing that could create.
All right, very cool stuff. Great interview, Shonali. Thanks very much for rushing back to the office and talking to us about it. We'll be back with more here on Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to talk to Aflac's Chief Human Resources Officer.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, welcome back to Bloomberg Business Week. Matt Miller and Katie Greifeld in for Carol and Tim. They'll be back very soon, don't worry. But in the meantime, we have a great conversation now with Jerry Hawthorne, the Chief Human Resources Officer over at Aflac. They have a new workforces report, which is all about the convergence of financial fragility and workplace disengagement. So, Jerry, great to have you with us. Walk us through some of the takeaways here, the top headlines from this.
Yeah, Katie and Matt, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I would say, the top headlines this year are that more and more Americans tend to say that they are burned out, with over half saying they're feeling some level of burnout. That's caused by everything from, external factors all the way to kind of that day-to-day workload, work-life balance. Financial fragility continues to be a big driver of that burnout and anxiety, as you have almost 40-some% employees who are unable to pay $1,000 out of pocket for an unexpected medical expense, and almost a quarter can't even pay 25%. So for us, the headlines are really that burnout is continuing, financial fragility is real, in particular as healthcare costs continue to increase. Employers are seeing anywhere from an 8 to 10% increase on an annual basis. Many of those are being cascaded down to the employees. So you've got people who are having to make decisions between, do I make a payment on, my Netflix account, or do I buy extra Christmas gifts for my children this year, or do I plan for an unexpected medical expense? So for us, it's really seeing that. And then mental health, burnout leads.
Hang on, let's take a beat for a second. Look at these things,
okay,
Jerry.
Sorry.
So there's two. No, it's great, and I think the report is really important, and I'm glad that you guys are doing this to highlight these issues, because of course, so many Americans are suffering from these two things. I just want to separate the kind of the mental health, and I would really put the sort of the great disconnect or the quiet quitting in that same basket, and the financial issue. Because in terms of the financial fragility, I feel like we can very easily understand that through the incredible amount of inflation that we've gone through. I mean, the fact that you can have $1,000 medical emergency is the kind of thing that would have shocked me as a kid, right? But now, that's just how much it costs. So the cost has soared by so much. The quiet quitting, I have more trouble understanding, because there's so many productivity tools that should be helping us, and also a lot more people are working from home at least 1 or 2 days a week. So why is the burnout epidemic getting worse and not better?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we found that 50% of employees are engaging in the quiet quitting behaviors. And that is really, they're not necessarily giving it 100%. And so I think that the two things sort of come together, meaning that one exacerbates the other. The burnout, the overwork, the stress, the kind of emotional heaviness that people are facing, I think that creates quiet quitting, because when you don't feel well, when you're overwhelmed, when you're anxiety ridden, it's hard to be and to bring your full self to the work environment. So I think it's a little bit of a self-perpetuating negative cycle that we're in, and that companies really need to focus on what we can do as employers to try to help break that cycle. One of the things that we found is that employees, where employers offer things like mental health benefits in addition to health insurance, when they offer things like supplemental health insurance in addition to regular health insurance, those are organizations where employees actually have higher levels of satisfaction as well as higher levels of performance for their organizations.
All right, Jerry, it's a really interesting report. Great to take some time with you to break it down. That, of course, is Jerry Hawthorne. She is Chief Human Resources Officer over at Aflac, joining us from Columbus, Georgia. Meanwhile, let's go out to California. Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic standing by right now. Of course, they're at the Schwab Impact Conference. Carol, Tim, what's coming up?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, we've got a lot of great interviews coming up, and I'm going to say we're going to kick it off with Rick Wurster. He is currently president of Charles Schwab. He will be taking over as CEO come January 1st. So we've lots of conversations with RIAs that are here. So I'm curious what he has been hearing on the ground. And Schwab is half a century old. So I'm trying to think about what they're thinking about the next 50 years and what he's thinking about maybe, as he takes over.
Of course, also ask him about the environment. Now that the election is over, we know who the president is going to be.
My name is Konstantin Stefana. I am the owner of I have a family office and the company called Company I Limited. I also have a live streaming channel for startups. It's SG Trader, so we let startups to pitch investment community on our channel. I give them 3-minute pitch. We publish their video on our channel, and everybody who is interested, please welcome to send me your video, and I will roll for almost a month your video for all financial community. The channel is live, it's streaming live 5 days a week. from morning till night.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for alleged war crimes in Gaza. Israelis have mixed reactions.
Maybe they should come here and live here for 2-3 months and they will understand everything.
As far as I'm concerned, he can sit in jail for the rest of his life.
A warrant was also issued for Israel's former defense minister. A congressional hearing on worldwide threats has been suddenly canceled. The leaders of the FBI and Department of Homeland Security declined to testify publicly. Correspondent Nicole Skanga says it's a break from tradition.
The FBI saying for its part, the agency leadership has testified extensively in public settings about the current threat environment and that they believe lawmakers would actually benefit from doing this in a classified setting. And Secretary Mayorkas, DHS pointed out, has publicly testified 30 times before Congress.
The committee's chairman said it's the first time in more than 15 years this has happened. Surgeons in New York have performed the first fully robotic double lung transplant. Dr. Stephanie Chang.
We did 3 single lung transplants and then kind of got it so refined and good enough where we could start doing double lung transplants.
The patient, a 57-year-old woman who was added to the lung transplant list just 4 days before. This is CBS News.
Or CVS.
It was a record-shattering night in college basketball. CBS News correspondent Steve Kathan has that story.
UConn women's coach Gino Auriemma is now the winningest college basketball coach of all time.
Victory number 1,217.
UConn beat Fairleigh Dickinson on SNY to secure the record, which Auriemma said is a tribute to his players.
I don't know how much I helped them get what they wanted, but they helped me get everything I wanted.
Auriemma had been tied with former Stanford coach Tara Vanderveer. His teams over 40 years have won 11 national titles. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
LeBron James says he's taking a break from social media. The NBA's all-time leading scorer and Los Angeles Lakers star posted on X and Instagram that he's stepping away. I'm Cammie McCormick, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live in San Francisco, day 2 of Schwab Impact here at the Moscone Center. It is, of course, Thursday, getting ready to wrap up almost the trading week. But we've got a lot of folks who are thinking about the investment environment in a big way. This is a massive conference for Schwab when it comes to registered independent advisors.
Yeah, it's called Schwab Impact 2024. Some 4,500 attendees here in San Francisco at Schwab's annual conference for independent RIAs and independent record keepers of Charles Schwab, the largest and longest running gathering of RIAs in the country. And we got a lot of great guests as a result of this conference.
Got one sitting down. We're talking about, of course, the head of Schwab, who is actually taking over as CEO come January 1st. So Rick Wurster's going to be with us in just a moment. Talk about the business, talk about what he's hearing on the ground. So looking forward to what he has to say.
Plus the blend between human and digital in the managing of money. It's something that you talked a lot about today.
We did. I had a panel on AI. I can't tell you how many of the folks here have been coming up to me and being like, oh my God, we did a demo. They want to know how AI can help, certainly, their business. And then we're going to do a deep dive into all of the investment plays that are out there, from global equities to U.S. stocks. Right now, though, what's going on in the markets? Back to New York and Charlie Pellet.
All right. I thank you very much. We got stocks pushing higher. In fact, the S&P 500 index, just about the best level of the day, 59.60, where we stand right now. Just under an hour to go until that closing bell clangs on Wall Street. The S&P up 43. That is a gain right now of about 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 548 now, up 1.3%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 45, up 0.2%. Has been a volatile day for NASDAQ. NASDAQ 100 index up 0.5%. And the Russell 2000 index, small cap shares, the outperformer today. The Russell 2000 up by 1.9%. Your 10-year right now, 4.42%. We do have the 2-year, 4.34%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.7%. 26.70. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2%, 70.16 a barrel. Cannot ignore the move in Bitcoin today, surging another 4.2%, taking out the 98,000 level, 98,442 where we stand right now on Bitcoin. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 43, up 0.7 for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right. Well, Charles Schwab, the company, recently out with earnings, the stock rallying on the news. A couple of analysts actually raising their price targets on the company following that report. Core net new assets brought to Schwab by new and existing clients came in at $24.6 billion. Total client assets are now approaching, Tim, $10 trillion.
That stock near a 52-week high, up about 16%. I could say 18%
yeah,
year
18
to date,
today, yeah.
As of today. With more on the company and the business, joining us here at Schwab Impact is Rick Wurster. He's current president of Charles Schwab, also incoming CEO of Charles Schwab, taking the CEO spot come January 1st. He's here with us on site in San Francisco. Good to be with you, the big annual event. How are you?
I'm loving it here at the event. 4,500 people here. There's so much energy, and it's all focused on helping the everyday Americans.
So let's talk a little bit about that and start there. What are you hearing? What's the big theme you're hearing this year as you walk around?
The big theme to me is always, what can we collectively do to make a difference in the lives of everyday investors? You mentioned the number $10 trillion. It's an overwhelming number, but behind every one of those dollars, it's a grandparent who's trying to help contribute to their grandkids' education. It's a family that's trying to take a nice vacation that they've been saving for. That's what matters to us.
I love that you say that, because as I walk around and talk to some of the advisors, you know, there may be $1 billion shop, a $2 billion, maybe even smaller, and they're always kind of apologizing. I'm like, no, you're the guys who are managing everybody's money. I kind of love that perspective.
Absolutely. And the thing about this community, we serve 15,000 advisors. They're in most communities across our country, sitting down to the table with people, helping them understand how to live their best financial life. And the power of that is so impressive.
Rick, one thing that has come up, we did a great broadcast from here yesterday, and no doubt about it, the elections continue to come up. How are you thinking about the elections, the impact that a new administration, new people running different regulatory bodies, certainly that play into the financial industry, how it might impact Schwab?
Well, there's a lot of potential change at play. We've heard a lot of proposals. It will be really interesting and important to watch how those play out. And we stand ready to do whatever we can to help the everyday investor. That's our focus. And
do you think things change much because of a new White House and a new team? Do you anticipate, from what we've heard on the campaign trail and some of the people that are being considered for positions?
I certainly think that there will be change, absolutely. I think with any administration there's change, and we've been through all sorts of presidential cycles and election cycles. And at the end of the day, what it means for us is we adapt and we do whatever we can to help the end client.
Well, how are you thinking about this from a regulatory perspective? We did hear today that SEC Chair Gary Gensler is going to step down by January 20th. Certainly the crypto community cheering that. How do you look at a change in leadership at the SEC?
Well, for us, our company is built on trust and has been for 50 years. Our entire industry is built on trust. If people can't trust their financial institution, the whole premise of what we do goes away. And so I think regulators play a really important role in that. And we've always had a great relationship with regulators. I think from our perspective, we want regulation that is thoughtful and makes sense for the end investor. And when that's the case, we'll do anything to support it. And we're looking forward to seeing who the next chairman's going to be.
Rick, what does it mean for crypto? And I'm curious if you guys see yourself getting into the crypto business. Here we are approaching $100,000. We have a president who initially or president-elect who maybe wasn't so into crypto is now very interested in it.
Now he's got his own crypto company.
What about for Schwab? What's the play here? Do you see yourself getting into it?
Well, we're in the crypto business
even more
today.
Aggressively,
we have lots of different ways for clients to participate. They can buy ETFs today. They can buy Bitcoin futures. They can buy closed-end funds. I think we will get into spot crypto when the regulatory environment changes, and we do anticipate that it will change, and we're getting ready for that eventuality.
Is there some, I don't know, is it growing up in your view?
I don't know. It's an interesting asset class, and people have really gravitated towards it. And, we never like to judge what people want to invest in. People on our platform, we think, are very thoughtful investors, very sharp. They make decisions about what they want to invest in, and crypto has certainly caught many's attention, and they've made a lot of money doing it. I have not bought crypto, and now I feel silly. So they've been the ones making all this money on crypto.
Are you thinking about buying it now?
Me personally, no, but we certainly support our clients that want to do that.
You answered my next question, which was going to be, do you own any crypto? But talk a little bit about that, because it's always interesting hearing from somebody in your space about their views on something. What's holding you back?
Well, I think what's holding me back is just a question around the true value of crypto. I like to invest in stocks, and with stocks, there's cash flows you can rely upon. There's dividends that accrue to you. With crypto, it's less certain what that will be, and it's less certain how to value it. So, to me, on a personal level, that's what makes crypto not something that I invest in. At the same time, we encourage our investors to invest in what matters for them. And I've talked to a lot of our investors who tell me I'm completely missing the boat, and they tell me all the great things about crypto. And you know what? They've been right, not me, because it keeps going up.
So far, they've been right. We'll see.
It's one we're going to continue to follow. It moves around a lot. It is a competitive space. Just this week, I just want to look at my notes. Robinhood announcing they're moving to the RIA space. I'm curious about how you were thinking about Schwab for the next 50 years as you get ready to take over as CEO. Not a new thing. Traditional investors, they're getting older. Younger investors, how they want to play and have more options. So what are your thoughts about Robinhood's move and maybe what you guys need to continue to do to attract younger investors who want those more options?
Well, for 50 years, our central theme has been to see through clients' eyes and do right by them. And we attract a lot of young investors to Schwab. In fact, 60% of our new-to-firm clients every year are under the age of 40. Our client base actually gets younger every year. So it's sometimes we're not thought of as that way, but we attract a lot of young investors because we have what we think is the best trading platform in the industry. And it also comes along with what we think is the best educational and training platform in the industry. And that aspect has really appealed to some of our younger, newer investors.
Got to ask you about the training side. And talking with advisors here, I was up on the stage doing a panel on artificial intelligence. And so many people came up to me afterwards and they're like, we got to talk to Schwab because I think we need a Schwab chatbot. AI, though, is impacting everything. How are you also, acknowledging, thinking about how that needs to be incorporated into what you offer up the advisory space?
Yes, so that comment about wanting an AI chatbot, what they don't recognize is that actually behind the scenes, we have built one for our client-facing professionals. And so it used to be that 60,000 times a month, we would have a phone rep spend more than 3 minutes searching for a piece of information to answer a client question.
Right.
And now we have built an AI capability that finds that information in seconds. And so it makes a better use of the client's time and allows them to focus and go deeper on wealth issues that we could potentially help them with.
But is there another level that you continue to think about? Okay, where does this go in helping advisors in terms of portfolio management or building out their businesses?
I think AI will have a really big impact on our industry. I think it will do a lot to help us better serve clients, to empower our professionals, to give them the right information at the right time.
Right.
I think it will also allow us collectively to help serve clients that we couldn't otherwise. We have 15 million retail clients. We can only have a person-to-person relationship with about 10 to 20% of that client base. There's 80% that we don't get to have that in-person dialogue with, and I think AI could bridge that gap and allow us to reach more clients.
Hey, before we let you go, I want to talk a little bit about the balance sheet, because you basically said you're trying to shrink the bank's balance sheet and not hold as many loans on the balance sheet, given what happened a couple of years ago, close to 2 years ago, with the regional banking crisis and the way you guys were brought into that. Just give us an update there on what you're going to do when you become CEO.
Well, I want to clarify. We never said we wanted to shrink our balance sheet. What we did allude to, and I think what you're referring to, is on an earnings call, we said as our balance sheet grows, we would consider using a third-party bank to take on some of those deposits. That's something that could make sense for us because of the way the economics work. We have to hold capital against deposits. We can send some of those deposits to another bank and earn a better return relative to capital when we do so. So it's a tool to have in our toolbox. It's not something we're going out and doing immediately. It's something we're considering. We'd only do it as our balance sheet grows and when it makes sense to do.
Challenging year, certainly for Schwab, with the regional bank crisis and so on and so forth. We talked about a lot on Bloomberg. Just got about 30 seconds. Are we past it? Do you feel confident? Or what's more to be done in terms of the impact that we've seen in the past year?
I've never been more optimistic about our business than we are today. We're number one or number two in the two fastest growing segments of the financial services landscape. And our client satisfaction scores have never been higher than they are today. So we're hitting on all cylinders as we roll into 2025, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
15 seconds. What's the most interesting thing in the investment space, do you think, right now?
I think the engagement among clients. It's just wonderful to see how engaged they are in markets and their financial life. When people own their tomorrow, they tend to have great financial outcomes.
Rick, thank you so much. I know there's a lot going on. I know this is a big event, but carving out some space for us, we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for making the commitment to be here. We love having you here.
It's a great perspective that we get to come and take back to New York and kind of share with some of our other guests. Rick Wurster, current president of Charles Schwab, taking over CEO on January 1st. This is Bloomberg from Impact.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks moving higher. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the green. 44-point jump right now for the S&P at 5960, up 0.7%. The Dow up 543 right now, up by 1.2%. NASDAQ up 56. That is a gain of 0.3%. The 10-year 4.42%. The 2-year 4.34%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 70.17 a barrel, up 2.1%. And Bitcoin 98,603. We're looking at a record on Bitcoin right now. First time above 98,000. Bitcoin up by 4.4%. So it is an update for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. As for the overall market backdrop, Cameron Dawson is Chief Investment Officer at New Edge Wealth.
We have to have some time to grow into these high valuations, so we wouldn't be surprised to see a more sideways, choppy market in 25 that looks like 2015 or 2018. If you remember those years, we didn't go very far, and there were opportunities for buying opportunities when we had sell-offs, and certainly times to be disciplined when the market rallied.
Cameron Dawson of New Edge interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. NVIDIA is ensuring investors that its new product lineup can maintain the company's AI-fueled growth run, though the rush to get the chips out the door is proving more costly than expected. NVIDIA shares right now, they are advancing. We've got NVIDIA up 1.6%. Snowflake after earnings up now by 32%. After the bell, we will be hearing from Intuit ahead of earnings up by 4.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, as you just heard in our conversation with Rick Wurster, Schwab alone has about almost $10 trillion in assets. Those assets essentially split evenly between retail investors and advisors. Now, as for the many registered independent advisors that Schwab works with and provides services, more than 15,000 independent advisory firms with over $4 trillion in assets under management. And what Schwab does, you know this by now, provides us a variety of services. We're talking about custody of client assets, technology, trading, also banking, and a lot more.
Overseeing all that side of the business, John Beatty is head of advisor services and a member of Charles Schwab's executive committee. He joins us here at Impact 2024 in San Francisco. How are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to join you today. We are having a great time here at the conference. Lots of optimism, great vibes.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that. And I don't want to jump right into it. We got a good bit of time with you, but you have a big job overseeing all this side of the business,
yes,
which I think retail investors don't really understand. But a big part of that is what happened with TD Ameritrade and that purchase. Wow, at this point, almost 5 years ago.
It's amazing.
Are you fully integrated? Has everything been fully brought over to Schwab?
We have been through the whole process, and certainly we did the conversion Labor Day of last year. And since then, we have been working through the opportunities for improvement, the feedback from our clients through that conversion, finding opportunities to enhance the platform for them. And so that is in the rearview mirror now.
So what was or has been the biggest bit of feedback you got from these clients? What changes have you made as a result of what you've heard from them?
You know, we went into the acquisition with the aspiration to bring the best of both platforms together, and we did that. But for advisors moving from one platform to another platform, it's change, right? So they had to learn a new system, and while they were learning that, they gave us feedback on how the technology works for them, where we could find ease of doing business, more scale and efficiency, so that they could spend more time with their investors. So they were coming at it from the right perspective in terms of wanting to be out, finding time with investors, as well as finding new clients to the platform.
John, one thing I want to ask you is, okay, so technology, things that advisors need. Did a panel here earlier about AI, and I can't tell you how many advisors came up to me and are like, oh my God, I wasn't using ChatGPT. I downloaded it, and I've just spent 20 minutes playing around with it. How is AI, generative AI, LLM, large language models, how are you thinking about what you need to be offering up to your advisors?
Yes, we are leaning into it, cautiously optimistic, going at it with a good pace. Our first place of opportunity, we think, is in knowledge. There's a lot of operational experiences between us and advisors, and so if we can bring knowledge to the fingertips and of our service professionals as they're working with advisors on the phone or through email or chat, we can be more precise in our answers and avoid work in not good order, which slows down the business, is a drag on friction within the business.
One thing, though, I got to say is people are worried, advisors are worried that they're going to be replaced by generative AI.
Yeah.
So I know there's hype, I know there's reality, but the conversations I'm having is that, yes, some jobs are going to go away. There will be new ones created as a result. So how are you also thinking about maybe that fear among many of your clients?
Well, we think, as we have with lots of technology, there's a cycle to it. And certainly things that are basic or that can be automated will be great opportunities for artificial intelligence. But that will just allow people to spend opportunities in value-added services in places that AI won't be able to go. And we think that investing is a relationship business. People want to talk to a human. It may be a long time before AI could replace that.
Sometimes I don't want to talk to a human. I'm just going to put it out there. But I get it.
Yes,
I get it.
Yeah, I mean...
But managing your money is personal.
Yeah, investing is technical, but it's also emotional, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure when AI will be able to handle somebody's emotions as it relates to the reaction to markets ups and downs, to be able to counsel somebody in that way. So we think that that's where the human intelligence plays a big role in the future.
To what extent do you help with portfolio construction behind the scenes with the RIAs, or is that left completely to them?
Yeah, our job as a custodian to advisors is to give them a platform where they can express their views on investing, whether that's through different kinds of products, ETFs, mutual funds. Certainly alternative investments is a growing part of the portfolio today. Even crypto is being discussed some between us and advisors while we're here. It's the newer part of the marketplace. So, and then it's the automation of investing, trading systems, rebalancing systems. That's where we can add value so that they can do their job of picking the investments and building the right portfolios based on the personal needs of one investor versus another investor.
How much, when you look at the growth that we've seen in the wealth management business and client assets coming in, how do you think about it going forward? We talked about the aging population, transfer of wealth, younger generation. What's your perspective on that?
A ton of opportunity for advisors. So we see the RIA channel is about a $9 trillion business right now.
Right.
We think that by 2034, it could be a $20 trillion business based on math and the momentum around growth.
Right.
Right now, there's $37 trillion of investable assets sitting in the traditional advice models. And that's the market opportunity for the independent advisor who brings a fiduciary type of advice model to the marketplace. And that's differentiating from an investor experience perspective.
How much of your business is about getting new RIAs on the platform, getting them to leave other custodial platforms, coming to you, versus growth of their own platforms?
I'm glad you asked that. It's about an 80-20 equation. Certainly, individual investors are waking up to the fiduciary model and choosing to work with independent advisors. But we see advisors in those traditional channels waking up to the business opportunity as well and exiting those channels to join the RIA space, registering with the SEC or their local state, starting their own firms, and joining the winning model. In addition to that, more recently we've seen advisors choosing not to start but to join existing firms in the RIA space. The joiner model is also fueling the transition or the transfer of assets from one part of the marketplace to the other part of the marketplace.
What are you seeing in the advisory space? I mean, just as you said, new folks coming in, but is it smaller firms that continue to dominate, or is it smaller firms combining to be bigger firms? I'm just curious about the competitive landscape.
We serve 15,000 advisors nationwide, as you said.
Yeah.
Small firms, $100 million of less of assets under management, and firms with $100 billion of assets under management.
What's the bulk?
The bulk of it's always the 80-20 rule, right? So 20% have 80% of the assets.
Yeah.
And as you know, M&A activity is grown in this space, and that's private equity and capital coming in to support a fast-growing market.
Yeah.
And we think that's a positive. But we also know there's a lot of fiercely independent entrepreneurs who are self-capitalizing their businesses and growing as well.
So consolidation in the space, net good for you?
We think it's positive, yes.
What happens if these companies consolidate and then they go to a different platform, though, or they get bought by a larger company that uses a different platform?
We're in all parts of the market, so we can benefit whether they choose to be a small firm, a mid-sized firm, or a large firm. So we can support any type of advisory firm in the marketplace. So when firms choose to come together to bring scale and efficiency to their business, we're there with them to support that. Sometimes advisors want to break away and start their own firm. We can help them launch those firms as well.
But does their scale give them more leverage over fees that they pay you? Are they able to?
Most of the fees have been wringed out of this business, so there's not much to negotiate anymore. So, we're focused on aggregation
kind of goes
of
back
assets.
to the origin of Schwab,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's about going to get the market share in terms of assets. The monetization aspect of it is pretty worked out in the marketplace, so not a lot of discussion in that aspect of it.
We talked with Rick Worster about the election outcome, politics, who will be in charge, what kind of policies. I don't know, how does that impact you on a day-to-day basis or longer term in terms of thinking about what you need to be doing?
Yeah, we're focused on investing. That's our core competency. And
everybody says that, but politics, it does matter in terms of policies, right? And who are the regulators and the types of things that come down. I mean, the markets initially seem like it's pro-business, pro-markets, but we shall see in reality.
Yeah, and there's lots of different takes on that depending on which advisor you talk to. And that's the beauty of the open architecture, is that there can be different perspectives, and investors can find the perspective that they enjoy and invest with those folks, and advisors can move from one firm to another firm. But it is quite optimistic here, so I think everybody's looking to go forward from this point forward.
I have to say, Tim and I think, loved coming to investment folks or events like this that you guys do, because you get people from all around the country, people managing, big offices, smaller offices, medium-sized offices. What is it that you are seeing in your business, what's going on, what you're hearing here on the ground that tells you about, I don't know, market sentiment, market behavior? Are there more risks out there? Are there less risks? Is there a big macro that you take away from here?
I think one of the areas of opportunity that I'm hearing advisors talk about is the opportunity to enhance performance through tax harvesting and creating alpha by managing portfolios in a tax advantage kind of way.
Yeah.
I think that's a place of differentiation for advisors and for the asset management community to earn opportunity with these advisors. Certainly that serves investors very well, right? So I think that could be the next frontier in the financial services industry.
Give us a prediction of what we'll be talking about if we're sitting across from each other a year from now at Schwab Impact 2025.
To be held in Bora Bora or Tahiti. I'm just saying, an idea.
Or Hawaii if you want to keep it in the U.S.
I hate to crush your dreams, but we're going to be in Denver next year. Yes,
okay.
yeah.
That's fine.
And I think we're going to be talking about the momentum of the marketplace and how advisors are finding differentiation and earning more opportunity and serving more investors, helping investors reach their financial dreams. And that's what it's all about for us, and as we have that shared vision with these advisors here.
Do you get all the talent you need, the workers? Is that 20 seconds? Are you finding all the skills that you need in people?
As you know, we are actively involved with universities. We sponsor 35 different universities nationwide in their financial planning programs.
Yeah.
We think advisors are going to hire 70 to 80,000 new employees in the next 5 years. So the talent is the fuel to growth, and we're focused on it.
All right, great stuff. John, thank you so much.
Glad to be here.
Good that you could stop by. John Beatty, Head of Advisor Services, a member of Charles Schwab's Executive Committee. Coming up next, more on the role of technology, blend between human and digital. We're going to continue this conversation. We are at Schwab Impact in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Business Week.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. 20 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. We got stocks ripping higher here. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks with an aggressive bid after some early morning weakness. The Dow is currently up 504 points. The S&Ps are higher by 0.6%, and the NASDAQ is now climbing by 0.1%. The U.S. 10-year yield is at 4.42. Gold is higher by 18. Oil is climbing, but Bitcoin tops 98,000. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were utilities and financials. Only consumer discretionary and telecom were in the red. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Salesforce and IBM, while Boeing and McDonald's led to the downside. After earnings, Snowflake soared 32%, NVIDIA rose 1.6%, and Deere climbed by 8%. In deal news, Quikrete is in advanced talks to buy Summit Materials. And wrapping things up, some of the names pointing after the bell tonight include The Gap, Intuit, and NetApp. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Mr. Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
TikTok.
Oh, is it already?
Yeah.
With this 2-hour show that we're doing.
I know. We feel
It's a
really
little different.
spoiled. And we're like a little off in terms of the market close.
I'm always off.
No, you're
Yeah.
not. You're always on.
It's like lunchtime here in California, which is a great place to be, by the way, when you're following the equity markets in New York.
I know, right?
Everything kind of ends at 2 o'clock.
Go out and have
1 o'clock.
lunch.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice. And markets, as we just heard from Charlie, we're just kind of rolling over our best levels of the session when it comes to the S&P 500. It's the Dow that's the outperformer. I know you can debate whether or not you like the Dow, but nonetheless, it's up about 1%. Let's get to our Drive to the Close guest. Jelena Kerr is with us. She is Managing Director of Client Experience, Schwab Advisor Services, works with John Beatty, who was just on, and she's here at Schwab Impact in San Francisco. Good to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
So tell us about some of the conversations you have with John about, what you're hearing from advisors, what they want, what they need. What's the churn, back at Schwab offices about, okay, what do we need to be focusing on?
I think it's a bit of a collision of sort of two things, two forces that are going to come together, not in a scary collision, but a really good sort of combination of things. And